They call him the Beast of Noctaryn, the king who ruled through blood and terror for 15 brutal years. But tonight, in the volcanic fortress where emperors come to die, Vaelor Draven stands at the edge of madness with nothing left to lose except the one fragile soul who dared to touch his scars. This is the story of how a cursed alpha learned that surviving and living are two different wars entirely. Stay until the end, because what happens in that throne room will shatter everything you thought you knew about power. Drop a like and comment your city below so I know my tribe is watching. The throne hall of Nightbane Citadel smelled like ash and old violence. Elyra Vale pressed herself against the cold marble column, trying to disappear into stone itself, while her stepsister Seraphine glided across the obsidian floor in cloth of silver that caught every flicker of torchlight. The Moonfall Convergence always felt like a cattle auction dressed in silk and ceremony. Daughters of noble houses paraded before King Vaelor Draven like merchandise waiting to be claimed or discarded, and everyone pretended it was about honor instead of survival. Elyra understood survival better than most. She had spent 23 years perfecting the art of being overlooked. Gray dress, eyes down, hands folded, voice quiet. Her Omega status made her an embarrassment to House Vale, a dying bloodline clinging to relevance through Seraphine's beauty and her stepmother's ruthless social maneuvering. Elyra existed only as a servant hidden behind family shame, useful for carrying cloaks and keeping silent while more important people negotiated futures she would never touch. The king sat motionless on his throne of black iron and volcanic glass. Even from across the massive hall, Vaelor Draven looked like something carved from nightmare and necessity. Tall enough to dwarf the guards flanking his seat, broad shoulders wrapped in dark armor that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. His face carried the kind of scars that told stories about surviving things that should have killed him. A jagged line cut across his left jaw, another traced from temple to cheekbone. His eyes were the color of smoke before fire, watching the parade of noble daughters with the detached interest of a predator counting prey. They said he killed his first enemy at 14. They said he executed his own generals for cowardice. They said the curse in his bloodline turned kings into monsters, and Vaelor survived only because he became something worse first. Elyra believed most of it. Power like his did not grow from mercy. Lady Morelle Vale, Elyra's stepmother, stood near the front of the crowd wearing emerald silk and ambition-like armor. She had spent House Vale's last reserves bringing Seraphine to this convergence, gambling everything on catching the king's attention. One royal marriage could resurrect their crumbling estate. One night of favor could erase decades of decline. Seraphine curtsied before the throne with practiced grace, blonde hair cascading over bare shoulders, smile warm and inviting. She looked like sunlight in a room built for darkness. The king barely glanced at her. Morelle's jaw tightened. 3 more daughters stepped forward, highborn alphas from ancient bloodlines, each one more stunning than the last. The king dismissed them all with subtle gestures that sent them retreating toward their families in various states of humiliation. Elyra watched from her column, grateful to be invisible. Then Morelle turned and locked eyes with her across the hall. Elyra's stomach dropped. She knew that look. Her stepmother began moving through the crowd with the purposeful stride of someone about to do something cruel in public. Seraphine followed, confusion flickering across her perfect features. Other nobles stepped aside, sensing drama about to unfold. Morelle stopped directly in front of Elyra, voice low and venomous. "You are going to approach the throne." Elyra's breath caught. "What?" "You heard me. Walk forward, present yourself." "Stepmother, I'm not even part of the—" Morelle's hand shot out and gripped Elyra's wrist hard enough to bruise. The pain was familiar, expected. Elyra had learned years ago not to flinch. Our house is dying because of your father's weakness. His bloodline produced nothing but you, a pathetic Omega who cannot even attract a minor lord. If I present you and the king rejects you publicly, it proves House Vale tried everything. Our failure becomes your shame, not ours. Do you understand? Elyra understood perfectly. She was being sacrificed to preserve her stepsister's reputation. If the king ignored Seraphine but also rejected Elyra with visible disgust, then House Vale could claim the royal bloodline itself was too damaged to recognize quality. They would leave the convergence with dignity intact, even if Elyra left with nothing. Seraphine touched their mother's arm. "This seems excessive." Morelle did not look at her daughter. Excessive is losing everything because your father married a weak-blooded nothing and cursed our lineage. Excessive is starving in a manor with no alliances left. This is necessity. She shoved Elyra forward, hard. Elyra stumbled into the open space before the throne, gray dress tangling around her legs. She tried to catch herself, but her foot caught on the hem and momentum carried her down. She fell hard on hands and knees, the impact jolting through her bones. The entire throne hall went silent. Hundreds of eyes locked on the Omega collapsed at the base of the king's dais like a broken offering. Elyra felt heat flood her face, humiliation burning hotter than the volcanic core beneath the citadel. This was worse than being invisible. This was being seen at her weakest moment by everyone who mattered. Someone in the crowd laughed. Others joined in. Morel's voice carried across the hall, theatrical and dripping with false concern. "Forgive my stepdaughter, Your Majesty. She has always been clumsy, an unfortunate trait in our bloodline we have tried to correct." More laughter. Elyra kept her eyes on the black marble floor, wishing it would crack open and swallow her whole. Her hands were shaking, her throat felt tight. She had survived years of cruelty by accepting it silently, but something about this public destruction felt different. Final. Then a shadow fell across her. She looked up. King Vaelor Draven had risen from his throne and descended the 3 steps of the dais. He stood directly above her, close enough that she could see the texture of his scars, the dark stubble along his jaw, the way his armor fit like a second skin designed for killing. He smelled like leather and smoke and something sharper, dangerous. His voice was rough, low, a sound that vibrated in the chest. "Stand up!" It was not a request. Elyra forced herself to her feet, legs unsteady. She was tall for an Omega, but still had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. Up close, the king looked even more brutalized by survival. The scars were worse, deeper. Some looked like claw marks, others like burns. His hands were massive, knuckles scarred, fingers stained with old violence. He studied her face with the intensity of someone evaluating a weapon. No one in the hall breathed. Elyra waited for dismissal, for disgust, for the verbal execution that would cement her as House Vael's greatest failure. Instead, the king spoke again. "What is your name?" The question caught her off guard. "Elyra Vale? Your Majesty, why are you here?" Honesty felt safer than deception in front of a man who looked like he killed liars before breakfast. "My stepmother wanted you to reject me publicly, so my failure would protect my stepsister's reputation." The corner of his mouth twitched. Might have been amusement, might have been contempt. Hard to tell, with a face built for intimidation. "And what do you want?" The question was so unexpected that Elyra answered without thinking. "To leave. To go home. To stop being used as ammunition in other people's wars." Silence stretched between them like a blade being drawn. Then the king did something no one anticipated. He extended his hand, not palm down for her to kiss in submission, palm up, an offering. Elyra stared at his scarred hand like it might be a trap. Behind her, she heard Morel's sharp intake of breath. The court shifted nervously. This was not protocol. Kings did not offer hands to fallen Omegas. They dismissed them, executed them, ignored them. They did not invite touch. But Vaelor Draven stood there with his hand outstretched, waiting with the terrible patience of something that had learned to survive by reading every micro-expression in an opponent's face. Elyra made a choice. She placed her trembling hand in his. The moment their skin connected, something impossible happened. The air pressure in the throne hall changed, not physically, something deeper, energetic, like reality itself held its breath. Vaelor Draven went completely still. Not the stillness of a man thinking, the stillness of a predator who had just sensed something ancient and overwhelming that his instincts could not name. His fingers closed around her hand slowly, carefully, like he was handling something fragile and explosive at the same time. His scars stopped hurting. Elyra did not know how she knew that, but the knowledge hit her with absolute certainty. For the first time in years, maybe decades, the king was standing in his own skin without pain, screaming through every nerve. His eyes widened fractionally. The curse, the inherited madness, the darkness that turned monarchs into monsters. It had gone silent. Elyra felt the bond click into place like a lock finding its key. Not romantic, not gentle, but undeniable. Her Omega instincts recognized what was happening even if her mind struggled to process it. This was not love at first sight. This was two broken pieces of something larger recognizing they fit together in a way that defied logic and politics and every rule governing royal selection. This was dangerous. Vaelor pulled her up the dais steps without releasing her hand. He turned to face the assembled court, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. The Moonfall convergence is over. Everyone leave, now. Nobles scrambled for the exits like rats fleeing a burning ship. Morel looked torn between rage and terror. Seraphine grabbed her mother's arm and dragged her toward the doors before something worse happened. Within moments, the throne hall emptied except for the king's personal guards, who stood at attention along the walls with the blank expressions of men who had learned not to question orders. Vaelor finally released Elyra's hand and stepped back, putting distance between them. He looked at her like she was a puzzle made of knives. "How did you do that?" "Do what?" His jaw clenched. "The pain. It stopped. The curse stopped." "What did you do?" Elyra's mind raced. "I did not do anything. I just touched you." "No one touches me." His voice was flat, but something raw moved beneath the words. "I have not allowed physical contact in 15 years because it makes the curse worse. Pain is the only thing that keeps me controlled. Touch triggers transformation. Yet you—" He stopped, shaking his head like the sentence was too impossible to finish. Elyra took a shaky breath. "I do not understand what is happening. That makes two of us." He turned away, running a hand through dark hair. "This is not possible. The curse does not just stop. It does not care about Omega bonds or political convenience or any of the desperate theories scholars have spent centuries developing. It only gets worse." "Maybe I am different." He barked a harsh laugh. "Everyone thinks they are different. Every generation tries to cure the bloodline. Herbs, alchemy, prayer, magic, blood sacrifice. None of it works. The curse is not a disease. It is inheritance. Punishment for whatever my ancestors did to earn the hatred of forces older than kingdoms. Then why did it stop when I touched you?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Vaelor turned back to her, and for the first time Elyra saw something other than control in his expression. She saw fear. Real, primal terror that had nothing to do with monsters or battlefields, and everything to do with hope. Because hope in his world was the cruelest trap of all. "If you can quiet the curse," he said slowly, "then you become the most valuable and most endangered person in the Empire. Every enemy I have made will try to kill you to restore my weakness. Every ally will try to control you to control me. Your life just became a weapon whether you wanted it or not." Elyra felt ice spread through her chest. "I did not ask for this. No one asks for the things that destroy them." His eyes locked on hers. "But here we are. I could send you home, pretend tonight never happened, let you disappear back into obscurity." "Why do you sound like you will not do that?" "Because I have spent 15 years ruling through suffering. Pain is my compass. Agony is my discipline. The curse kept me sharp, kept me brutal, kept me alive in a throne room full of predators waiting for any sign of weakness." His voice dropped lower. "And in 5 seconds, you took it all away. Do you understand how catastrophic that is? How destabilizing? I do not know how to be a king without pain." Elyra met his gaze without flinching. "Maybe you were never supposed to be." The words landed like the blade between ribs. Vaelor stared at her for a long moment, something shifting behind his eyes. Then he moved to his throne and dropped into it like the weight of the conversation had become physical. He looked exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. "What is your family situation?" "Awful. My father is dead. My stepmother hates me. My stepsister tolerates me. Our house is bankrupt and desperate, so if I keep you here, no one will fight for your return." Elyra's throat tightened. "No. No one will fight." "Good." He leaned back, studying her. "You will stay in the Citadel as my guest. I need to understand what you are before I decide what to do with you. I am not a thing to be decided about." His smile was sharp. "In this kingdom, everyone is. The only variable is who does the deciding." He gestured to one of the guards. "Escort her to the East Wing. Private quarters. Post sentries. No one enters without my direct authorization." The guard stepped forward. Elyra did not move. What happens if the curse comes back? Vaelor's expression went cold. Then I lock myself in the sanctum beneath this fortress and pray the chains hold. Same as always. And if they do not? Then everyone in the citadel dies screaming, and the empire collapses into civil war within 48 hours. His tone suggested he had made peace with that possibility years ago. But that is not your concern. Your concern is staying alive long enough for me to figure out if your salvation or the most elaborate assassination attempt in continental history. Elyra wanted to argue, but the exhaustion in his voice made her pause. This was not a tyrant enjoying power. This was a man barely surviving it. She followed the guard toward the doors. Vaelor's voice stopped her at the threshold. Elyra. She turned. The king looked at her with something that might have been gratitude or might have been grief. Hard to tell the difference when both were buried under decades of survival instinct. Thank you, he said quietly, for the silence, even if it was only temporary. Then he waved her away and the doors closed between them like the fall of an executioner's blade. The east wing of Nightbane Citadel was built into the volcanic rock itself, rooms carved from obsidian and basalt that radiated heat even in winter. Elyra's quarters were larger than her entire bedroom back home, furnished with dark wood and furs that smelled faintly of smoke. A massive window overlooked the northern mountains, jagged peaks crowned with ice that glowed silver under the half moon. She stood at the window for a long time, trying to process what had happened. 6 hours ago, she had been invisible. Now she was a prisoner in the most dangerous fortress on the continent, bound to a cursed king by something neither of them understood. A knock at the door made her jump. She opened it to find a young woman in servant's gray holding a tray of food. The woman looked nervous, eyes downcast, moving with the careful efficiency of someone who had learned not to attract attention. His Majesty thought you might be hungry. Elyra took the tray. Thank you. The servant hesitated, then spoke quickly. I am Lysa. I have worked in the Citadel for 3 years. If you need anything, ask for me specifically. The other servants... She stopped, choosing words carefully. Just ask for me. Why? Because I know how to keep my mouth shut. Lisa glanced down the corridor. Half the staff reports to Lord Mylik, the king's uncle. He runs intelligence networks inside the palace. If you say something sensitive to the wrong person, it will reach him within the hour. Elyra absorbed that. And you do not report to him? I report to the king. There is a difference. Lisa met her eyes for the first time. His Majesty is not what people think. He is brutal because brutal is the only language this court understands. But he is not cruel for pleasure. Remember that when things get worse. Why would they get worse? Lysa's expression turned grim. Because you are the first person in 15 years to touch the king without dying. That makes you either a miracle or a threat, and this empire does not handle either well. She left before Elyra could respond. Elyra ate in silence, tasting nothing. She tried to sleep, but nightmares of scarred hands and cursed bloodlines kept jolting her awake. Around midnight, she gave up and returned to the window. The citadel looked different at night. Darker. More honest. Like it stopped pretending to be civilized and showed its true face. She wondered if the king was awake too. If he was lying in some private chamber, feeling the curse creep back into his bones now that she was not there to quiet it. If he regretted letting her stay. Or if he regretted letting her go. The thought made something twist in her chest. Not attraction. Not yet. But recognition. The bone-deep understanding that their lives had just collided in a way that would reshape both of them. She did not know if that was destiny or disaster. Probably both. Morning arrived with the sound of boots in the corridor. Elyra opened her door to find 4 royal guards standing at attention, led by a scarred beta with sergeant's insignia. He looked at her with the flat assessment of someone evaluating a tactical problem. His Majesty requests your presence at the morning War Council. Elyra blinked. War Council? I am not qualified to... It was not a request. She dressed quickly in the same gray dress from yesterday, realizing too late that she had no other clothes. The guards escorted her through the citadel's maze of corridors, past training yards where soldiers sparred in the pre-dawn cold, past kitchens already roaring with activity, past halls lined with portraits of dead kings who all shared Vaelor's brutal features. They reached a heavy ironwood door guarded by 2 additional sentries. Inside, the war room felt like the heart of an empire built on violence. A massive table dominated the center, carved from a single piece of black wood and covered with maps, military reports, and strategic markers. Generals and advisors stood around it in various states of tension. All alpha. All male, except for one silver-haired woman in battle-scarred leather. And at the head of the table, King Vaelor Draven stood with his hands braced on the wood, studying a map of the northern territories like it was a battlefield he intended to conquer before breakfast. He looked up when Elyra entered. Everyone else turned to stare. The room's energy shifted immediately. Suspicion, confusion. Hostility barely leashed. She was an Omega in a space designed for dominance, wearing a servant's dress and no credentials except the king's inexplicable invitation. One of the generals, a broad-shouldered man with graying temples, spoke with barely concealed contempt. "Your Majesty, what is the meaning of this? The Omega from last night?" Vaelor did not look away from Elyra. "Her name is Lady Elyra Vale. She will be attending all morning councils from now on." The general's jaw tightened. "With respect, sire, these discussions involve classified military intelligence. Omega presence in strategic planning sessions violates—" "I am aware of protocol, General Noctaryn." Vaelor's voice went cold. "I wrote most of it. I am also aware that I rule this kingdom and can invite whoever I want to council. Do you have a problem with my judgment?" The threat beneath the question was crystal clear. General Noctaryn stepped back. "No, Your Majesty." "Good." Vaelor gestured to an empty chair near his position. "Elyra, sit." She moved to the chair, feeling every eye track her movement like predators watching prey. She sat carefully, keeping her expression neutral even though her heart was hammering. The silver-haired woman broke the tension. "I am Commander Kael, Northern Legions." She nodded at Elyra with something that might have been respect. "If you are here, you matter. That is enough for me." Elyra managed a small nod back. Vaelor resumed his briefing like nothing had happened. The border fortresses report increased activity from the Korsian Empire. 3 scouting parties in 2 weeks. They are testing our response times. General Noctaryn frowned. "Korsian has not moved against us in 5 years. Why now?" "Because they think I am weakening." Vaelor's tone was matter-of-fact. "The curse has gotten worse. Everyone knows it. They are waiting for me to transform and lose control so they can invade during the chaos." Another advisor, younger with sharp eyes, spoke up. "What if we reinforce the northern line? Show strength?" Vaelor shook his head. "Reinforcement looks defensive. Defensive looks weak. We need to make a move that proves I am still in control, something decisive." "Like what?" The king's smile was sharp and completely devoid of warmth, like executing the next border scout we capture and sending his head back in a diplomatic box. "Make it clear that testing boundaries has consequences." The room went silent. Elyra felt her stomach turn. That was the difference between stories about brutality and witnessing it in real time. Vaelor was not suggesting violence because he enjoyed it. He was calculating the exact amount of cruelty necessary to prevent a war that would cost thousands of lives. It was practical. It was horrifying. It was kingship. Commander Kael nodded. "Brutal, but effective. I will handle it personally." The meeting continued for another hour. Supply lines, troop rotations, intelligence reports from rival kingdoms. Elyra sat silently, absorbing information she barely understood. But she noticed something important. Every time Vaelor started to make a particularly ruthless decision, his hand would drift unconsciously toward the scars on his jaw, like he was checking to make sure the pain was still there, still guiding him. And every time he did it, his eyes would flicker briefly toward her, like he was measuring distance, or permission, or maybe just reassurance that she was real. When the council finally ended, the advisors filed out with various levels of resentment. General Noctaryn was the last to leave, pausing at the door to deliver one final barb. "Be careful who you keep close, Your Majesty. Weak hearts make weak thrones." Vaelor's response was quiet and lethal. "I have survived 15 years by knowing exactly who to keep close and who to bury. Do not mistake compassion for weakness, General. They are not the same thing." Noctaryn left. The door closed. Vaelor exhaled slowly, shoulders dropping fractionally. He looked at Elyra. "What did you think?" Of what? The council. The decisions? Me. Elyra chose honesty. I think you terrify everyone in this room because they cannot predict you anymore. I think you make brutal choices to prevent worse outcomes, and I think you hate that it works. He stared at her for a long moment. Then he laughed. Actually laughed. The sound was rough, unpracticed, like something that had not been used in years. You are dangerously perceptive. You asked. Most people lie when I ask. They tell me what I want to hear. What do you want to hear? He moved closer, closing the distance until he stood directly in front of her chair. I want to hear that I am not a monster, that survival and morality are not mutually exclusive, that somewhere beneath 15 years of blood and pain, there is still a man worth saving. Elyra's breath caught. But that would be a lie, he continued, because the truth is, I am exactly what this kingdom made me. And the only reason I am still breathing is because I became worse than everything trying to kill me. His hand reached out slowly, telegraphing the movement, giving her time to pull away. She did not move. His fingers touched her jaw, gentle despite the scars and calluses. The moment contact registered, his entire body relaxed fractionally, like someone had cut strings holding him upright. It works, he said quietly. Even now. The curse is silent when you are near. What does it feel like? When it stops? Like I can finally think clearly, like I am not fighting my own mind every second. His thumb brushed her cheek. It is the most dangerous thing I have ever experienced. Why dangerous? Because a king who is not in constant pain starts wanting things he cannot afford to want. Like what? His eyes searched hers. Like peace. Like trust. Like someone who looks at me and sees a human being instead of a useful monster. I see both. I know. His hand dropped away. That is what makes you dangerous. Before Elyra could respond, the door burst open. A young guard stumbled in, face pale. Your Majesty, Lord Maelor requests immediate audience. He says it is urgent. Vaelor's expression hardened instantly, the vulnerable moment evaporating like it had never existed. Tell him I will see him in the throne hall. Now. He looked at Elyra. Stay here. Do not leave this room. His voice dropped. What I am about to do, you do not need to witness. Then he was gone, moving with the predatory grace of something built for violence. Elyra stood alone in the war room, heart pounding. Through the thick walls she heard footsteps echoing, voices rising, the distant clang of steel. And then, sharp and unmistakable, a scream cut short. She pressed her hand against the wall, feeling the volcanic heat beneath obsidian stone. Whatever was happening in the throne hall, it was brutal. It was necessary. And it was the reality of loving a king who survived by becoming the monster before worse monsters could destroy him. That's. Hours passed before Vaelor returned. When the door finally opened, he looked exactly the same except for fresh blood on his knuckles. He did not apologize for it, did not explain. Just moved to the window and stared out at the mountains like they held answers violence could not provide. Elyra spoke carefully. What happened? Maelor tried to rally support for removing you from the citadel. Said your presence corrupts me, makes me weak. What did you do? Reminded him that I am still king, that my bloodline built this empire, and that questioning my judgment in public is treason. His voice was empty. He will not make that mistake again. Did you kill him? No. But I made sure everyone in the court understands the cost of disloyalty. Elyra moved to stand beside him at the window. You cannot keep doing this. Ruling through fear alone will eventually collapse. I know. His reflection in the glass looked haunted. But fear is the only language they understand. The moment I show weakness, I am dead. The moment they think love matters more than survival, they replace me. Love and survival are not opposites. In this kingdom, they are. Then maybe the kingdom is wrong. He turned to face her, and for the first time she saw genuine uncertainty in his eyes. If I choose you, if I let myself believe there is something more important than power, I put the entire empire at risk. Every enemy will see it as vulnerability. And if you do not choose yourself, you will rule forever, but never actually live. The words hung between them like a sword hovering above both their necks. Vaelor reached out slowly and pulled her close. Not romantically, desperately. Like someone drowning who had just found solid ground. His forehead pressed against hers. His scarred hands framed her face, and he whispered the most dangerous thing a king could ever admit. "I do not know how to do this. Neither do I." "Good. Then we learn together." He kissed her, not gently, not tenderly, but with the desperate intensity of someone who had spent 15 years alone in a fortress built for war, finally finding someone willing to stand beside him in the darkness. When they finally broke apart, Vaelor's expression had changed. Still brutal, still dangerous. But underneath all that survival instinct, something softer stirred. Hope. And hope in the hands of a cursed king was the most catastrophic weapon in the Empire. That night, assassins came for Elyra. She woke to the sound of steel scraping stone and a hand clamping over her mouth. Two figures in dark cloth moved through her room with lethal efficiency. One held a blade that glinted silver in the moonlight. She tried to scream, but the hand muffled everything. Then the door exploded inward. Vaelor moved like death itself. The first assassin died before he could react, throat crushed by a single strike. The second managed to raise his blade, but Vaelor caught his wrist and twisted until bones snapped. The man screamed. Vaelor did not stop. He broke the assassin against the wall with enough force to crack stone. When silence finally returned, two bodies lay motionless on the floor and the king stood over them, breathing hard, blood on his hands and murder in his eyes. He turned to Elyra. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, too shocked to speak. Vaelor crossed to her in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms, checking for injuries with shaking hands. His control had finally fractured. Beneath the brutal king was just a man who had almost lost something irreplaceable. "I should have posted more guards, should have anticipated this, should have— I am alive." Elyra's voice cut through his spiral. "You saved me." He looked at her like she had just said something impossible. "You do not understand what this means. Assassins in the Citadel, in your room. That means someone inside the palace wants you dead. Someone with access, resources, power." His face hardened into something terrifying. "And I am going to burn this entire fortress down until I find them." But before he could move, before he could start his rampage through the palace hunting traitors, Elyra grabbed his face and forced him to look at her. "Listen to me. If you go on a killing spree right now, you prove Malek right. You prove that I make you reckless, emotional, weak. You play directly into their hands. I do not care." His voice was raw. "I will not let anyone hurt you. Then protect me by being smart instead of brutal. Find the traitor carefully, strategically. Prove you can still control the kingdom even with me here." She felt the tension vibrating through him, the war between instinct and discipline. Finally, he exhaled. "You are right." He stepped back, pulling control around himself like armor. "But mark my words, Elyra. Whoever sent these assassins will die screaming. Not today, not tomorrow, but eventually. And everyone in this citadel will know the cost of threatening what is mine." His eyes blazed with something beyond rage, beyond possessiveness, beyond sanity. And Elyra realized with absolute certainty that she had just become the most dangerous person in the Empire, not because of her own power, but because she had given a cursed king something worth destroying the world to protect. The bodies were removed before dawn. Elyra watched from her window as guards carried the wrapped corpses through the courtyard below, moving with the practiced efficiency of men who cleaned up violence regularly. 2 assassins, 2 failures, 2 warnings that someone inside Nightbane's citadel wanted her dead badly enough to risk the king's wrath. She had not slept after Vaelor left. He had stationed 8 guards outside her door with orders to kill anyone who approached without his explicit authorization. The message was clear: touch her and die. But messages only worked if the people receiving them cared about living, and assassins were rarely concerned with survival once they accepted a contract. The door opened without knocking. Vaelor entered carrying a bundle of dark fabric. He looked like he had not slept either. His jaw was tight, shoulders rigid, eyes scanning her room like he was memorizing every shadow that could hide a threat. He dropped the bundle on her bed. Armor. Custom fitted for an Omega. Leather reinforced with steel plates at the vital organs. Light enough to move in, strong enough to stop a blade. "You are wearing this from now on." Elyra picked up the chess piece. It was beautifully made. Expensive. The kind of protection usually reserved for royal guards or high-value targets. "I am not a soldier." You are now. His voice was flat. Anyone close to me becomes a target. That is the cost of proximity to power. You can either learn to defend yourself or you can die. I prefer the first option. She met his eyes. You cannot protect me every second of every day. Watch me. The statement was not arrogance. It was a threat directed at the universe itself. Vaelor Draven had decided she was worth keeping alive, and reality would bend or break to accommodate that decision. Elyra set the armor down carefully. Who do you think sent them? The king moved to the window, staring out at the volcanic mountains like they held answers violence could not extract. Myleek is the obvious suspect. He hates that you exist, believes you corrupt my judgment. But he is too smart to move this quickly. This attack was desperate, sloppy. Whoever ordered it wanted you dead before I could consolidate protection around you. So not your uncle. Probably not. Which means I have enemies I have not identified yet. He turned back to her. That is the problem with ruling through fear. Eventually people get desperate enough to risk everything because dying quickly seems better than living under constant threat. Do you regret it? The way you rule? Every day. His honesty was brutal. But regret does not change results. I inherited a kingdom on the edge of collapse. Warlords circling, noble houses scheming, the curse getting stronger with each generation. I had two choices. Become so terrifying that no one dared challenge me or die within a year like my father did. What happened to your father? Assassinated in his own bed by his most trusted advisor. Vaelor's expression went cold. The advisor believed he was weak because he tried to rule with compassion, tried to build alliances through diplomacy instead of dominance. It got him a knife through the heart at age 37. So you learned the wrong lesson? No. I learned the only lesson that keeps kings breathing. Trust is a luxury, mercy is a gamble, and the moment you prioritize anything above survival, you are already dead. Even love? Especially love. Love makes you vulnerable, reckless, willing to sacrifice everything for one person instead of protecting the empire. His eyes locked on hers. That is why you are so dangerous. You make me want things that will get both of us killed. Then send me away. I cannot. Why not? Because the curse is silent when you are near, and I have spent 15 years in constant agony. His voice dropped. Do you understand what that means? Every second of every day I feel like my skin is on fire, like something is clawing its way out from inside my bones. The pain is so constant I barely remember what it feels like to exist without it. He moved closer. And then you touched me. And for the first time since I was 18 years old, I could think clearly. The noise stopped. The burning stopped. I could breathe without feeling like I was suffocating on my own bloodline. His hand reached out, hovering near her face but not quite touching, asking permission. Elyra closed the distance. His palm pressed against her cheek and his entire body relaxed. The tension bled out of his shoulders. His breathing deepened. For just a moment, the brutal king disappeared, and what remained was just a man who had survived hell by becoming something worse than the demons chasing him. I am selfish, he whispered. I am keeping you here because I need you, not because it is fair, not because you chose this, but because I finally found something that makes survival feel like living. Elyra's throat tightened. That is the most honest thing you have ever said to me. Honesty is dangerous in politics. Good thing we are not talking about politics. His smile was sharp. Everything is politics when you wear a crown. Then take it off. The suggestion hung between them like a blade. Vaelor pulled back slowly. If I could, I would. But kings do not retire. They rule until they die or get replaced. Those are the only options. There is always a third option. Not for me. His voice turned hard. I was born into this bloodline, raised to believe my only purpose was continuing the dynasty. The curse chose me before I could choose anything else. I never had freedom, never had options. I had duty and pain and the knowledge that thousands of lives depended on me being strong enough to carry both. That is not strength, that is imprisonment. Welcome to monarchy. A knock at the door interrupted them. Enter, Vaelor commanded. Commander Kyle stepped inside, silver hair pulled back in a warrior's braid, expression grim. Your Majesty, we found something. One of the assassins carried a mark. House Corvin, minor nobility from the southern provinces. Corvin. Vaelor's jaw tightened. They have been angling for more power for years, loyal to Maelek politically but too weak to move independently, which means someone stronger is backing them. Kael glanced at Elyra, then back to the king. The attack was funded. Professional. These were not desperate men. They were paid contractors. Find out who paid them. Vaelor's voice went deadly quiet. Use whatever methods necessary. I want names, locations, financial records, everything. And when we have them, public execution, entire bloodline. I want every house in this empire to understand that threatening what is mine costs everything. Kael nodded without hesitation and left. The door closed. Elyra stared at Vaelor. You are going to kill an entire family? Yes. Children too? The king's expression did not change. I will spare children under 10. The rest made their choice when they chose to back assassination. That is the price of treason. That is genocide. No. Genocide is systematic extermination based on ethnicity or culture. This is tactical elimination of a specific threat. His tone remained flat. If I show mercy, it signals weakness. Other houses will see opportunity. More attacks will come. More people will die. The only way to prevent escalation is overwhelming response that makes the cost too high for anyone else to consider. You sound like you are justifying it. I am not justifying anything. I am explaining reality. His eyes were hard. You want me to be better, kinder, more forgiving. I understand that impulse, but the empire does not run on good intentions. It runs on fear and calculated brutality. That is the system I inherited, and the only system that keeps foreign armies from burning this kingdom to ash. Elyra felt something cold settle in her chest. If you are going to be with me, she said slowly, then you need to understand something. I will not become numb to this. I will not pretend killing families is acceptable just because it is strategically sound. You want me here? Fine. But I will remind you every day that there are costs beyond tactics. That the people you execute had lives and futures, and maybe even loved someone the way you are starting to love me. Vaelor studied her face for a long moment. Then he nodded. Good. Good? Yes, if you stop seeing the cost, I have already lost you. His voice softened fractionally. I need someone who reminds me I am human, even when being human is strategically stupid. That is the most terrifying thing you have said yet. Why? Because it means you know you are wrong, but you are going to do it anyway. Welcome to kingship. The words echoed his earlier statement, but this time they carried weight like a funeral shroud. The next 3 days passed in careful tension. Elyra attended morning war councils wearing the armor Vaelor had given her. She said little, but listened carefully, learning the rhythms of imperial politics. Who deferred to whom? Which generals respected each other? Which advisors were ambitious enough to be dangerous? General Torin continued making subtle comments about Omega involvement in strategic planning. Commander Kael shut him down every time with the efficiency of someone who had fought beside the king long enough to recognize what mattered. Vaelor remained coldly professional during meetings, but Elyra noticed small changes. He touched his scars less frequently, made decisions faster, spoke with less underlying rage. The curse was still there, still waiting beneath his skin like a coiled serpent, but her presence kept it manageable. At night he came to her quarters. Not for intimacy, though the tension between them was growing impossible to ignore. He came because being near her allowed him to sleep without nightmares. They would sit by the window and talk until exhaustion finally dragged them under. He told her about his childhood, about watching his father get assassinated, about being crowned at 18 with no training and enemies circling like wolves, about the first time the curse manifested and he woke up covered in blood with no memory of what he had done. She told him about House Vael's slow collapse, about her father's death when she was 12, about learning to be invisible because visibility attracted her stepmother's cruelty, about the loneliness of being Omega in a world that valued dominance above everything else. They were two people shaped by survival, trying to figure out if connection was possible after years of isolation. On the fourth morning, Commander Kael brought news. We have the names. The war room cleared except for Vaelor, Kael, and Elyra. The commander spread documents across the table. Financial records, correspondence, witness testimony extracted through methods Elyra did not want to imagine. House Corven received funding from 3 sources. Kale pointed at the papers. 2 are minor nobles with grudges against the crown. Manageable. The 3rd is more complicated. Who? Lord Darius Vex. He represents the Southern Coalition. 23 noble houses who believe the empire should be governed by council instead of monarchy. Vaelor's expression went cold. Vex wants my throne. He wants power distributed. Argues that concentrating authority in one bloodline, especially a cursed one, is too dangerous. His voice was carefully neutral. He has been building support quietly for years. How many houses support him? Openly? 7. Privately? Kale hesitated. Maybe 20. But they will not move unless they think you are weakened. And my connection to Elyra looks like weakness. To traditionalists, yes. An Omega influencing the throne challenges centuries of precedent. Vex is using it to rally support. Vaelor turned to the window, staring out at the mountains with the expression of someone calculating casualties before the battle even started. If I execute Vex, I start a civil war. If I ignore him, I signal that treason has no consequences. What is the middle path? There is not one. Kale's voice was pragmatic. You either destroy him completely, or you negotiate power sharing. Both options cost you. Then I choose destruction. Vaelor turned back. Arrest Vex under charges of funding assassination, public trial, full transparency. Let the evidence speak. That gives him a platform. He will use the trial to make his case against concentrated monarchy. Good. Let him. Vaelor's smile was sharp. I want every noble in this empire to hear his argument. Let them decide if council governance sounds better than what I have built. And when the evidence proves he paid for assassins to murder an unarmed Omega in her sleep, we will see how many houses still support his vision of distributed authority. It is a risk, KL warned, if he is charismatic enough. Then I will execute him for treason before his charisma matters. Vaelor's voice went flat. But I will give him the dignity of a trial first. That is more mercy than he gave Elyra. KL nodded. I will make the arrangements. After she left, Elyra spoke carefully. You are setting a trap. Yes. What if it fails? What if nobles support him anyway? Then I kill everyone involved and rule through absolute fear for the rest of my life. His tone suggested he had already accepted that possibility. But if it works, I prove that my judgment is sound, that the Omega beside me does not weaken the throne, that I can still control the empire even when enemies try to exploit perceived vulnerability. You are gambling with both our lives. I have been gambling since I was 18. He moved to stand in front of her. The only difference is now I have something worth winning for. His hand cupped her face. His thumb brushed her jaw. And despite everything, despite the violence and the political maneuvering and the bodies piling up in service of maintaining power, Elyra felt herself leaning into his touch. Because the truth was more complicated than good and evil. Vaelor Draven was brutal because brutality kept people alive. He was ruthless because mercy invited assassination. He was terrifying because terror prevented war. And beneath all that survival instinct was a man who had never been allowed to just exist without the weight of an empire crushing him. She kissed him. Not gently, not hesitantly. With the desperate hunger of someone who had spent years believing connection was impossible, suddenly finding someone willing to share the burden of existence. He responded immediately, pulling her close with hands that knew how to kill but chose instead to hold. The kiss deepened, years of isolation burning away in the friction between them. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Vaelor rested his forehead against hers. If this goes wrong, he whispered, if Vex wins support and civil war breaks out, I want you to leave the Citadel. Commander Kael will escort you to the northern borders. You will have protection, resources, a new identity if necessary. Elyra pulled back to look at him. I am not leaving. You do not understand what civil war means. It means sieges, starvation, soldiers turning on each other. The Citadel will become a tomb. Then we die in the tomb together. That is not romantic. That is stupid. Maybe. But it is my choice. She held his gaze. You spent your whole life believing you had to carry everything alone. That leadership meant isolation. You are wrong. If you are going to fight, I fight beside you. That is what partnership means. Vaelor stared at her like she had just spoken a language he did not understand but desperately wanted to learn. You are going to get us both killed. Probably. Her smile was grim, but at least we will die as something other than survivors. He kissed her again, and this time there was nothing calculated about it. Just raw need and the terrible acknowledgement that they had both found something worth destroying the world to protect, which made them either the most dangerous people in the Empire or the most doomed. Likely both. Book. Lord Darius Vex was arrested at dawn. The entire citadel watched as royal guards escorted him through the courtyard in chains. He was mid-50s, silver-bearded, dressed in expensive silks that suggested wealth and influence. He did not struggle, did not shout, walked with the dignified bearing of someone who believed history would vindicate him. Vaelor watched from the battlements above, Elyra beside him. He looks calm, she observed, because he thinks he has already won. The king's voice was quiet. He believes the trial will expose me as a tyrant, that nobles will rally to his cause once they hear his arguments, that public opinion will force me to negotiate or abdicate. Will it? No, because I'm going to give him exactly what he wants. A fair trial, full transparency, every noble house represented. And when the evidence proves beyond doubt that he funded assassination, those same nobles will demand his execution themselves. You really think it will work that way? I think people are predictable when their survival is threatened. Vaelor glanced at her. Vex wanted to redistribute power, make the Empire safer by removing concentrated authority from a cursed bloodline. Noble sentiment. But the moment nobles realize supporting him means backing assassination, they will abandon him. Because assassination as a political tool threatens everyone. If it works once, it can work again. And suddenly every lord with ambition becomes a target. So you are turning his allies against him. I am reminding them that stability matters more than ideology. His smile was cold. That is the difference between philosophy and kingship. Philosophers debate principles. Kings manage consequences. The trial was scheduled for 3 days later. In that time, Nightbane Citadel transformed into a political arena. Noble houses arrived from across the Empire, filling the fortress with colors and banners and barely concealed tension. Everyone wanted to witness the confrontation between concentrated monarchy and distributed governance. Elyra watched the preparations from her window. Workers constructed viewing galleries in the throne hall. Scribes prepared documents. Guards doubled patrols. The entire citadel felt like a powder keg waiting for someone to strike a match. Lysa, the young servant who had warned her about palace informants, brought evening meals with increasing nervousness. "Everyone is taking sides," she whispered while setting down the tray. Half the court supports Lord Vex quietly. They believe he is right about the curse being too dangerous. And the other half? Terrified of civil war. Lysa glanced toward the door. But here's the thing no one is saying out loud. If Vex wins this trial through public opinion, even if His Majesty executes him for treason, the idea will survive. Other nobles will pick up the banner. The Empire will fracture. Elyra absorbed that. So Vaelor needs to destroy not just Vex, but the entire concept he represents. Yes. And I do not know if that is possible once an idea takes root. She hesitated. Be careful, my lady. You are the visible symbol of what Vex argues against. An Omega influencing the throne. If things go badly, you become the scapegoat. After Lysa left, Elyra stood at the window watching storm clouds gather over the mountains. She understood now why Vaelor had tried to send her away. This was not just a trial about assassination. It was a referendum on whether the Empire could evolve or whether tradition would strangle progress in the name of stability. And she was standing at the center of that conflict, whether she wanted to be or not. The night before the trial, Vaelor came to her quarters later than usual. He looked exhausted. Not physically, though the tension was carving deeper lines around his eyes. Emotionally, like he had spent the day making calculations that cost pieces of his soul. He dropped into the chair by the window without speaking. Elyra poured him water from the pitcher on the table. He took it but did not drink. Tomorrow decides everything, he finally said. If the trial goes as planned, I consolidate power and prove the Empire can function with you beside me. If it fails, We either face civil war, or I have to remove you from the Citadel to salvage political stability. Which option do you think will happen? I have no idea. His honesty was brutal. I have spent 3 days gaming out every scenario. Vex is smart, charismatic. He will make a compelling case, and the evidence against him, while damning, requires nobles to prioritize rule of law over political sympathy. I cannot predict which instinct will win. So we are gambling. We are always gambling. That is what power is. Calculated risks that cost lives when you guess wrong. Elyra moved to stand in front of him. Then let me ask a different question. If you could choose, truly choose without considering the empire or stability or consequences, what would you do? He looked up at her, something raw and unguarded in his expression. I would burn the throne, walk away from the crown, take you somewhere far from politics and bloodlines and curses, spend whatever time I have left learning what it feels like to be human instead of king. But you cannot. No. Because 10,000 soldiers depend on the empire staying intact. Because border kingdoms will invade the moment they sense weakness. Because the curse does not care about my desires and will eventually consume me regardless. His voice dropped. I am trapped by duty and biology, and the weight of generations of violence that built this kingdom. Then we make the most of the time we have. She kissed him. Not desperately this time, slowly, with the deliberate intensity of someone choosing connection despite knowing it was temporary and probably doomed. He responded carefully at first, then with increasing hunger. His hands moved to her waist, pulling her closer. The armor she wore got in the way, and he helped her remove it piece by piece until there was nothing between them except skin and scars, and the terrible acknowledgement that they were both falling in love with disaster. They moved to the bed. What followed was not gentle or romantic or any of the soft things stories promised. It was raw and desperate and honest. Two people shaped by violence and survival trying to find something sacred in the wreckage of their lives. Afterward, they lay tangled together while moonlight streamed through the window, and somewhere in the distance, storm clouds continued gathering over the empire. Vaelor traced the line of her shoulder with calloused fingers. If tomorrow goes wrong, he whispered, if I have to choose between you and the kingdom, I do not know what I will do. Yes, you do. He went still. You will choose the kingdom, because that is what kings do. That is what you have spent your entire life being trained to do. Elyra turned to face him. And I will not hate you for it, because I understand survival is not about want. It is about carrying the weight of other people's lives, even when it destroys you. His eyes searched hers. How are you this strong? I'm not strong. I'm just tired of pretending weakness protects people. She touched his scarred jaw. You taught me that. By surviving things that should have killed you, by refusing to break even when the curse tried to turn you into a monster. You showed me what resilience actually looks like. Vaelor pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. I do not deserve you. Probably not. But you have me anyway. They fell asleep like that. Two damaged people holding each other against the weight of an empire that demanded everything and offered nothing in return. When dawn came, everything would change. The trial would either save them or destroy them. And there was no middle ground left. Look, the throne hall was packed to capacity. Every noble house of significance had sent representatives. The viewing galleries overflowed with courtiers and diplomats and ambitious lords hoping to witness history. Guards lined the walls with hands on weapons, ready to suppress any violence that erupted. Vaelor sat on his throne wearing full royal regalia, black armor chased with silver. The crown of Noctaryn, forged from volcanic glass and dark steel. He looked exactly like what he was, a king built from violence and survival, sitting in judgment over men who wanted to tear down everything he represented. Elyra stood to his right, slightly behind the throne. She wore armor under dark silk. Her position was deliberate, visible enough to make a statement, respectful enough to avoid challenging protocol. She was there as his partner, not his equal, because the empire was not ready for equality yet. But she was there, and that mattered. Lord Darius Vex was brought forward in chains. He stood in the center of the hall, silver beard neat, eyes clear, expression calm. He looked like a statesman, a reformer, someone history might remember as a martyr to progress. Vaelor's voice cut through the silence like a blade. Lord Vex, you are accused of funding assassination against Lady Elyra Vale. The evidence is substantial: financial records, witness testimony, written correspondence linking your house to the contracted killers. How do you plead? Vex did not hesitate. Guilty, Your Majesty. The hall erupted. Nobles shouted. Guards tensed. Scribes scrambled to record the admission. Vaelor raised a hand and silence crashed down like a physical weight. You admit to ordering the death of an unarmed Omega? I admit to funding an action I believe necessary to protect the Empire from greater harm. Vex's voice was steady. You ask how I plead. I plead guilty to treason against your crown, but I plead innocent to treason against the kingdom itself. The distinction landed like a bomb. Explain, Vaelor commanded. Vex turned to address the crowd. For 15 generations, the Draven bloodline has carried a curse that turns kings into monsters. Every ruler eventually loses control. Towns burn. Innocents die. And we rebuild, hoping the next king will somehow be different. He gestured toward Vaelor. This king has survived longer than most through sheer brutality, through making himself so terrifying that no one dares challenge him. But survival is not the same as thriving, and now he has bound himself to an Omega whose influence is already changing his decisions. That is not evidence of weakness, someone shouted from the gallery. No, Vex agreed. It is evidence of humanity returning to someone who needs to remain inhuman to function. His eyes locked on Vaelor. Your Majesty, I believe you are a good man trapped in a terrible position. I believe the curse will eventually consume you no matter how strong you are, and I believe the Empire deserves governance that does not depend on one bloodline holding back the darkness through constant suffering. So you tried to kill the one thing keeping me stable. I tried to remove the variable that was making you vulnerable. Vex's voice was gentle. If you love her, truly love her, then she becomes the weapon your enemies use against you. Every decision you make will be filtered through protecting her. You will sacrifice the Empire to keep her safe. That is what love does to power. The words hung in the air like poison, because they were true. Vaelor stood slowly from his throne. The entire hall held its breath. He descended the dais steps and walked toward Vex until they stood face to face. King and reformer, monster and martyr. When Vaelor spoke, his voice was quiet enough that only the front rows could hear. You are right. Shock rippled through the crowd. Love is a vulnerability. Elyra makes me human again, and human kings make mistakes that cost lives. Everything you said is accurate. His eyes were cold as winter. But here's what you misunderstand about power, Lord Vex. Strength is not the absence of weakness. Strength is choosing to fight despite weakness. Choosing to protect what matters even when logic says you should sacrifice it. He turned to address the full hall. You want to know if I am compromised? Yes. You want to know if my judgment is affected by emotion? Absolutely. You want to know if I would burn this empire to ash to keep her safe? His voice rose until it filled the entire throne room, without hesitation. The admission was so raw, so brutally honest that nobles flinched. That is the truth you wanted. I am exactly what Lord Vex fears, a king who has found something more important than the crown. And if that terrifies you, if you believe distributed governance is safer than concentrated power in the hands of someone who might choose love over duty, then vote for his reforms. Strip my authority, create your councils and committees and democratic processes. He smiled, and it was the most dangerous thing Elyra had ever seen. And then watch what happens when border kingdoms realize the empire is divided. When warlords sense opportunity. When the curse finally consumes me and there is no central authority strong enough to contain the aftermath. Silence. Absolute silence. Because every noble in that room knew he was right. Vaelor returned to his throne. Lord Vex is guilty of treason. The evidence is undeniable. But his motivation was genuine concern for the Empire. So I offer the court a choice. He leaned forward. Vote. Right now. Should the Empire transition to distributed governance as Vex proposes? Or do you trust that I can rule effectively even when compromised by emotion? The vote will determine his sentence. If you support his vision, I will commute his execution to exile and begin implementing reforms. If you support the current system, he dies at dawn for funding assassination. Choose. The throne hall erupted into chaos. Nobles argued. Factions formed. The vote was called. And in that moment, with his own power on trial and the woman he loved standing witness, King Vaelor Draven did the most dangerous thing a monarch could do. He let go. Not of the crown, but of the certainty that he could control the outcome through fear alone. He sat on his throne and waited while the Empire decided if a monster learning to love was worth the risk. The vote took 6 hours. When the count was finally tallied and announced, when the nobles had made their choice and sealed both Vex's fate and the future of Noctaryn, Vaelor looked at Elyra with eyes that held both victory and grief. Because the Empire had chosen survival over progress, had chosen concentrated power over distributed risk, had chosen the devil they knew over the uncertainty of reform. Lord Vex would die at dawn, and King Vaelor Draven would continue ruling through blood and terror and impossible devotion. But something fundamental had changed in that throne room. The Empire had seen their king admit vulnerability, had watched him gamble everything on honesty instead of manipulation, and they had chosen him anyway, not because they feared him, but because they finally understood that the most dangerous kings were not the ones who pretended to be perfect. They were the ones who admitted they were broken and fought anyway. As guards escorted Vex to the dungeons, as nobles filed out in various states of shock and satisfaction, Vaelor descended from his throne and took Elyra's hand. He said nothing. Did not need to. They had crossed the point of no return together, and there was no going back to the people they had been before. Dawn came with the sound of steel on stone. Elyra woke to find Vaelor already dressed, standing at the window watching the execution platform being assembled in the courtyard below. He had not slept. She could tell from the rigid set of his shoulders, the way his hands gripped the window frame like he was holding himself upright through sheer will. Lord Vex would die in 2 hours. The Empire had spoken, tradition over reform, concentrated power over distributed risk. The vote had not been close. 73 noble houses supported Vaelor's continued rule. Only 19 backed Vex's vision of council governance. It should have felt like victory. Instead, the citadel hummed with the kind of tension that preceded earthquakes. Elyra rose and moved to stand beside him. You did not have to give them the choice. Yes, I did. His voice was rough from disuse. If I had just executed him without trial, without letting the nobles voice their concerns, it would have proven Vex right, that I rule through fear alone, that I cannot tolerate dissent. He turned to look at her. This way, they chose. They saw the alternative and decided concentrated monarchy was less dangerous than the chaos of transition. Do you believe that? That you are less dangerous? No. His honesty was brutal. I am exactly as dangerous as Vex claimed, maybe more so now that I have something to lose. But the nobles calculated risks and decided my brutality is predictable, manageable, preferable to civil war and foreign invasion during a power vacuum. That is not trust. That is pragmatism. Welcome to politics. There is no difference. A knock interrupted them. Commander Kael entered without waiting for permission. Her face was grim. We have a problem. Vaelor turned from the window. What kind of problem? 3 noble houses that voted in your favor are requesting immediate private audience, separately. Before the execution, Kael's jaw tightened. They claim to have information about security threats to the throne, all 3 requesting meetings at once. Vaelor's eyes narrowed. That is coordinated. What do they want? Unknown. But Lord Hadrian of House Mareth, Lady Sarah of House Blackwell, and Duke Corwin of House Thrain are not minor players. Collectively, they control 1/3 of the Empire's standing military. Vaelor absorbed that. If they turn against me after voting in my favor, it splits the Empire worse than if Vex had won. Exactly. Kael glanced at Elyra. They all specifically requested that Lady Vale be present for the meetings. Elyra felt ice spread through her chest. Why would they want me there? Because whatever they are planning involves you. Vaelor's voice went flat. They are either going to demand your removal as the price of continued loyalty, or they are going to use you as leverage for concessions, or they are going to kill us both. Elyra said it quietly. Vaelor looked at her for a long moment. That is also possible. The pragmatic acknowledgement of assassination as a legitimate concern was somehow more terrifying than panic would have been. This was the reality of power, constant calculation of who might betray you and why. Kael cleared her throat. What are your orders? Schedule the meetings. 1 hour apart, maximum security. Armed guards inside the room, not just outside. Vaelor moved to his armor stand and began strapping on reinforced plates, and prepare a secondary escape route from the throne hall to the underground passages. If this is a trap, I want options. You think they would move against you in the citadel itself? I think desperate men do desperate things. And nobles who voted for me but now request secret meetings before an execution are either very loyal or very desperate. His eyes were cold. We will find out which in about 3 hours. After Kael left, Elyra started putting on her own armor. The leather and steel had become familiar weight. Protection she hoped would never be tested, but wore anyway because hope was not a strategy. Vaelor watched her with an expression she could not quite read. If this goes wrong, he said carefully, if they move against us during these meetings, I need you to run. Do not try to fight. Do not try to help me. Just get to the escape tunnels and keep moving until you reach the northern pass. We already had this conversation. I am not leaving. Elyra. His voice carried the weight of command. I can fight my way out of almost any situation if I only have to worry about myself. But if I am trying to protect you while fighting trained soldiers, we both die. Do you understand? Your presence makes me weaker in combat, not stronger. The honesty cut deeper than anger would have. Then why keep me here at all? Why not send me away before the trial? Because I am selfish. Because having you near keeps the curse quiet and lets me think clearly. Because I have spent 15 years alone and I finally found someone who makes survival feel like living. His jaw clenched. But all of that becomes irrelevant if we are both dead. So promise me. If things collapse, you run. Elyra met his eyes. I promise I will survive. That is all I can give you. It was not the promise he wanted, but it was the only honest one she could make. They descended to the throne hall together. The first meeting was with Lord Hadrian of House Mareth. He was older, 60s maybe, with iron-gray hair and the bearing of someone who had commanded armies. He entered flanked by 2 guards but dismissed them at Vaelor's gesture. Only royal guards remained, positioned along the walls with hands near weapons. Hadrian bowed correctly, but without excessive deference. Your Majesty, Lady Vale. Vaelor remained standing, forcing Hadrian to look up. You requested this meeting. Speak. Hadrian took a breath. I voted for your continued rule yesterday because I believe distributed governance during wartime is suicide. However, I have concerns about long-term stability. Every noble has concerns. Be specific. The curse. Hadrian's voice was steady. We all know it is getting worse, so we all know you have survived longer than any king in 4 generations. But survival is not the same as cure. And if the Lady Vale is the only thing keeping you stable, then she becomes the Empire's single point of failure. Vaelor's expression did not change. Continue. If something happens to her, you transform. If you transform, the Empire collapses. Therefore, she needs to be protected at a level that exceeds even your personal security. Hadrian looked at Elyra. I am not here to demand her removal. I am here to offer additional resources to keep her alive. The statement hung in the air. Elyra studied Hadrian's face, looking for deception. She found only pragmatic calculation. What resources? Vaelor asked. House Mareth controls the eastern fortresses. I can provide a rotating guard of 50 elite soldiers whose sole responsibility is Lady Vale's protection. Not palace guards who answer to multiple masters. Warriors loyal to me personally, which means loyal to keeping you stable. And what do you want in return? Hadrian smiled slightly. I want the Empire to not collapse. My grandchildren live here. My legacy is tied to Noctaryn's survival. If protecting her protects the kingdom, then it serves my interests. Vaelor considered. 50 elite guards is an army inside my citadel. Not an army. Insurance. Hadrian met his eyes. Your Majesty, I fought beside your father. I watched him die because he trusted the wrong people. I do not trust easily, but I trust that you want to survive, and I trust that she is the key to that survival. So let me help you protect the key before someone else breaks it. The logic was sound, too sound. Vaelor glanced at Elyra, some silent question passing between them. She gave the smallest nod. Hadrian felt genuine. Motivated by self-interest, yes, but self-interest aligned with their survival. Except Vaelor's voice was formal. Send your 50 soldiers. They will be quartered separately and answer directly to Commander Kael. If any of them step out of line, you answer for it personally. Understood. Hadrian bowed and left. After the door closed, Elyra spoke quietly. That felt too easy. Because it was honest. Vaelor moved to the window. Hadrian wants the empire stable because instability destroys his house. Pure self-interest is easier to trust than ideological loyalty. He turned back. The next 2 meetings will not go that smoothly. The second meeting was with Lady Sarah of House Blackwell. She entered like a knife wrapped in silk. 40s, dark hair, eyes that calculated angles before speaking. She was one of the few female house leaders in the empire, which meant she had clawed her way to power through intelligence and ruthlessness. She did not bother with pleasantries. I voted for you yesterday because distributed governance is a fantasy that gets people killed. But I did not vote for this. She gestured toward Elyra. An Omega influencing the throne was not part of the equation when I pledged my house's support. Vaelor's voice went cold. Lady Elyra is not up for negotiation. Everything is negotiable. Sarah's smile was sharp. I control the southern trade routes. 40% of the empire's revenue flows through my ports. If I close them, your army does not get paid. Your fortresses do not get supplied. Your kingdom bleeds economically within 3 months. That would be treason. That would be leverage. She tilted her head. I am not demanding her removal. I am demanding guarantees that she will not influence military or economic policy, that her role remains ceremonial. Elyra felt anger flare hot and immediate. I have no interest in policy influence. I never asked to be here. Sarah's eyes flicked to her dismissively. Yet here you are, in the war room, at councils, wearing armor like you have any right to stand beside kings. She looked back at Vaelor. You opened a door you cannot close, Your Majesty. Every Omega in the Empire now believes they can aspire to power. Every traditional house sees that as destabilization. Vaelor moved with deadly calm. Let me be very clear, Lady Sarah. I appreciate your trade routes. I value your economic contribution. But if you threaten to close ports as leverage, you become an enemy of the crown. And I do not negotiate with enemies. I eliminate them. You would start a civil war over an Omega? I would start a civil war over the principle that my authority is absolute. The Omega just happens to be the line you chose to draw. His voice was lethal. So ask yourself if your trade routes are worth dying for, because that is the choice you just presented. Sarah's expression flickered. Fear, quickly masked. She had miscalculated, assumed Vaelor would negotiate, compromise. She had forgotten that brutal kings do not compromise when challenged publicly. She chose retreat. Perhaps I was hasty. My concerns remain, but I will table them for future discussion. Good. Then this meeting is over. Sarah left quickly, her guards falling in behind her. After the door closed, Elyra released breath she did not realize she was holding. She tried to use me as a wedge. Yes. Vaelor's jaw was tight. And she will try again. More subtly next time. Sarah is dangerous because she is patient. She will wait years if necessary, building support, creating opportunities. Can you trust her? No. But I cannot eliminate her without proof of treason. He looked exhausted suddenly. This is kingship. Managing people who hate you, negotiating with those who would prefer you dead, and calculating which threats to neutralize versus which to contain. The third meeting was with Duke Corwin of House Thrain. He was younger than the others, late 30s, with the kind of handsome features that suggested he had never been denied anything his entire life. He entered with casual arrogance, like the throne hall was his personal parlor. Vaelor did not hide his contempt. Say what you came to say. Corwin smiled. I voted for you yesterday, Your Majesty. Want to know why? Not particularly. Because I hate Vex's idealistic nonsense. Distributed governance is for weak kingdoms that cannot produce strong kings. Corwin's smile widened. But here is the thing. I voted for the king I remember, the brutal bastard who executed traitors without hesitation, who ruled through fear and strategic violence, who made enemies disappear before they could organize. That king is still here, is he? Because the king, I remember, would never have given nobles a vote, would never have admitted vulnerability, would never have stood in front of the entire empire and confessed that an Omega makes him human. Corwin's voice dropped. You have gone soft, Vaelor, and soft kings do not last. Get to the point. The point is, I made a mistake voting for you. The empire needs a strong ruler, someone willing to do what is necessary without sentimentality. He gestured toward Elyra. She is making you weak, and weakness invites invasion. Vaelor's hand went to his sword. Are you challenging the throne? I am offering an alternative. Corwin's confidence was absolute. Step down voluntarily, abdicate in favor of someone more suited to rule. I will ensure your safety and hers. You can live out your remaining years in peace before the curse consumes you. The audacity was breathtaking, and if I refuse, then I withdraw House Thrain's military support, and I convince the other 18 houses that backed Vex to reconsider their position. Corwin shrugged. You won the vote yesterday by a margin of 54 houses. If I peel away 20, suddenly distributed governance looks viable again. Civil war becomes inevitable. You are threatening me in my own throne hall. I am offering you a graceful exit before reality forces an ugly one. Vaelor moved so fast that Elyra barely tracked the motion. One moment he was standing 10 feet from Corwin. The next, his hand was wrapped around the Duke's throat, lifting him off the ground, slamming him against the stone wall hard enough to crack ribs. The royal guards did not move. They had seen their king kill before. Vaelor's voice was a whisper that somehow carried more threat than a shout. You came into my home, ate my food, bowed before my throne, and then you threatened me while my guards watched. Do you understand what that means? Corwin struggled, face turning red. It means I am not afraid of you anymore. Wrong answer. Vaelor's grip tightened. Corwin's eyes went wide. He clawed at the king's hand, feet kicking uselessly, and then Elyra spoke. Stop. Vaelor did not look at her. This does not concern you. Yes, it does. She moved closer. If you kill him here, now, you prove Sarah right. That I make you reckless. That emotion overrides judgment. He deserves death, probably. But death is not the only punishment. Her voice was steady. Send him home in disgrace. Strip his titles publicly. Make him an example of what happens to ambitious fools. Death is quick. Humiliation lasts. Vaelor held Corwin against the wall for 5 more seconds. Then he dropped him. Corwin collapsed, gasping, clutching his throat. Vaelor's voice was dead calm. Duke Corwin of House Thrain, you are hereby stripped of all titles and lands. Your house is dissolved. Your military forces are conscripted into the royal army. You have until sunset to leave the citadel. If you are found within empire borders after that, the penalty is execution. He turned to his guards. Escort him out. Make sure every noble in the fortress sees his shame. The guards moved immediately, dragging Corwin toward the doors. As he was pulled away, Corwin shouted back, This is not over. Other houses will rise. You cannot kill all of us. The doors slammed shut. Silence filled the throne hall. Vaelor stood motionless, breathing hard, knuckles white from clenched fists. Then he turned to Elyra. You should have let me kill him. Maybe. But you would have regretted it. I rarely regret necessary violence. This was not necessary. This was rage. She held his gaze. You are allowed to be angry, but you cannot let anger make decisions for you. That is what separates kings from tyrants. The line between king and tyrant is thinner than you think. I know. That is why I stopped you. He stared at her for a long moment, something shifting behind his eyes. Then he pulled her close, forehead against hers, hands shaking with leftover adrenaline and suppressed violence. Thank you, he whispered, for being my conscience when I cannot afford to have one. Someone has to keep you human. That is a losing battle. Probably. But I'm stubborn. Despite everything, he almost smiled. Then Commander Kael burst through the doors, face pale, moving at a run. Your Majesty, we have a situation. Vaelor straightened immediately, battle instincts engaging. What situation? Lord Vex. He is gone. Someone broke him out of the dungeons during your meetings. 3 guards dead. The cell door was unlocked from the inside. The words landed like a physical blow. Inside, Vaelor repeated slowly. Someone with access helped him escape. Yes. Kael's jaw was tight. And there is more. We found correspondence in Vex's belongings, letters to and from multiple noble houses. He had more support than we realized. How much more? She handed over a leather folder. At least 30 houses. Maybe 40. They were coordinating, planning to use the trial as distraction while they positioned forces for rebellion. Vaelor opened the folder and went very still. Elyra watched his face shift as he read, saw the exact moment realization hit. His eyes lifted to meet Kael's. Hadrian. The commander nodded grimly. Lord Hadrian of House Mareth. The letters are coded, but the markers match his house seal. He has been funding the rebellion for months, but he just offered me 50 soldiers to protect Elyra. Vaelor's voice was hollow. He pledged loyalty 2 hours ago. It was a distraction. While you were focused on Sarah and Corwin, Hadrian's men infiltrated the dungeons. Kael's expression was devastated. I am sorry, Your Majesty. I should have seen it. You could not have known. Vaelor set the folder down carefully. Where is Hadrian now? His soldiers are already inside the citadel. Not 50, 200. They have been arriving in small groups over the past week, posing as merchants and travelers. Kael took a breath. They control the eastern wing, the armory, and the main gates. Vaelor went very still. That is not an escape plan. That is an invasion. Yes. Where is Vex? Believed to be with the rebel forces consolidating in the lower fortress. They are fortifying positions as we speak. How long until they move on the throne hall? Hours. Maybe less. Kael looked at Elyra. They want her dead. That is the primary objective. Kill Lady Vale, the king transforms, the curse takes over, and in the chaos they seize control. Vaelor's hands curled into fists. How many loyal soldiers do we have? 300, maybe 350 if we count palace guards. But they are scattered. Most of our forces are stationed at border fortresses. We are undermanned. The math was brutal. 200 rebel soldiers already inside, plus however many houses pledged to Vex, against 300 loyalists defending a fortress compromised from within. This was not a battle. This was an execution waiting to happen. Elyra felt her chest tighten. What are our options? Vaelor looked at her, and for the first time since she had met him, she saw genuine fear in his eyes. Not many. We can try to fight our way out through the underground passages, hope we reach the northern borders before rebel forces cut us off. His voice was hollow. Or we can make a stand in the throne hall, use defensive position to even the odds, potentially hold long enough for border reinforcements to arrive. How long would reinforcements take? 3 days minimum. Can we hold for 3 days? Kael's silence was answer enough. Vaelor turned away, staring at the throne like it was a cage instead of a seat of power. Everything his father built, everything he survived to protect, about to collapse because he let his guard down for 5 minutes of vulnerability. This is my fault, he said quietly. I gave them the vote, showed weakness. Let them see that I care about something more than the crown. No. Elyra's voice was sharp. They were planning this before the trial, before I ever arrived. The letters prove it. You are not weak for being human. They are cowards for hiding behind philosophy while planning murder. Does not matter. The result is the same. His shoulders sagged fractionally. I lost the kingdom the moment I admitted I would burn it to keep you safe. Then we burn it together. That is not comforting. It was not meant to be. Despite everything, despite the rebels closing in and the empire collapsing around them, Vaelor laughed, sharp and painful and real. You are catastrophically stubborn. Yes, and you love me for it. The admission hung in the air between them, unspoken until now, undeniable in the face of imminent death. Vaelor crossed to her in 3 strides and kissed her, hard, desperate, the kiss of someone who knew this might be the last time. When they broke apart, his expression had changed. The fear was gone. What remained was calculation. Strategy. The brutal king who survived by making choices that destroyed part of his soul every time. Kael. Gather every loyal soldier in the citadel. Fortify the throne hall. Barricade every entrance except the main corridor. Force them into a kill box if they want to reach us. That will turn this into a siege. Good. Let them commit to assault. Vaelor's voice was cold. Meanwhile, send runners through the escape tunnels. Get word to border fortresses. I want reinforcements moving within the hour. Even if they march immediately, they will not arrive in time. Then we hold, however long it takes. Against 2-to-1 odds? Against whatever it takes." His eyes blazed. "I have survived things that should have killed me. I have fought enemies larger and stronger and better equipped. I have bled on every battlefield from here to the northern wastes. And I will not die in my own fortress because ambitious nobles think an Omega makes me weak." He turned to Elyra. "I need you to do something for me. Anything. Survive." His hand cupped her face. "Whatever happens in the next few days, whatever you see me do, however brutal it gets, I need you to promise me you will survive. Even if I do not." Elyra felt tears burn behind her eyes. "We survive together or not at all. That is romantic but impractical. I do not care." "You should. Too bad." He pulled her close one more time, and she felt the tremor in his hands, the barely controlled violence, the terror beneath the tactical planning. King Vaelor Draven had spent 15 years surviving through brutality, but he had never fought a war where losing meant watching the only person he loved die in front of him, and that changed everything. Outside, the sound of steel on stone grew louder. Soldiers moving into position, rebels preparing for assault, the Empire fracturing along fault lines that had always been there, just waiting for the right pressure to split everything apart. Vaelor released Elyra and moved to the window one last time, staring out at Nightbane Citadel, preparing for civil war. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone making a choice that would define him forever. "Tell the soldiers to prepare for siege. No surrender, no negotiation. We hold this throne hall until reinforcements arrive or until everyone inside is dead." He turned back, and his eyes were the color of smoke before wildfire. "And if the rebels want Elyra, they will have to go through me first. And I promise you, Commander, by the time they reach her, there will not be enough of me left to curse. Because the truth that Vex and Hadrian and all the ambitious nobles had forgotten was simple. A king who has nothing left to lose is the most dangerous weapon in any empire. And Vaelor Draven had just lost everything except the woman standing beside him and the crown that was rapidly becoming more cage than kingdom. The siege began at sunset, and in the throne hall of Nightbane Citadel, a cursed king and the Omega who loved him prepared to prove that sometimes survival was not about winning. It was about refusing to break. Even when breaking would be easier, even when the entire world demanded it, even when the only path forward required becoming the monster everyone always feared you were. The first wave hit the throne hall at midnight. Elyra heard them coming before she saw them. Boots hammering stone, steel scraping steel, the war cries of men who believed they were fighting for the Empire's future instead of their own ambition. The main corridor leading to the throne hall had been transformed into a killing ground. Overturned furniture created choke points. Archers positioned in elevated alcoves. Every loyal soldier Vaelor could muster stood ready to bleed for a king most of them feared, and an Omega they barely understood. Vaelor stood at the center of the throne hall, wearing full battle armor, sword drawn, eyes tracking every shadow, like he could see death before it arrived. He had not spoken in 20 minutes, had barely moved, just stood there calculating angles and probabilities and acceptable losses. This was not the king who held her at night. This was the weapon that survived 15 years through strategic brutality. Commander Kale moved among the soldiers, checking positions, reinforcing weak points. She caught Elyra's eye and nodded once. Not reassurance, acknowledgement. They were all about to die or survive together, and there was no middle ground left. The rebels hit the barricades like a storm against cliffs. The sound was deafening. Steel on wood, men screaming, arrows finding flesh. The loyal soldiers held the first choke point, forcing rebels into a narrow corridor where numbers meant nothing, and skill determined who lived. Bodies fell. Blood spread across black marble floors. The throne hall filled with the copper smell of violence and the sharper scent of fear. Vaelor watched from his position, not moving yet, letting his soldiers handle the initial assault. But Elyra saw the tension in his shoulders, the way his scarred hands gripped his sword. He was waiting for something, some sign that would tell him when to enter the fight. The first barricade collapsed after 30 minutes. Rebels poured through the gap like water through a cracked dam. Loyal soldiers fell back to secondary positions, fighting for every inch. The throne hall became a chaotic mess of close-quarters combat where strategy dissolved into survival instinct. That was when Vaelor moved. He did not charge, did not shout, just stepped into the melee with the calm efficiency of someone who had been killing since before most of these soldiers were born. His sword moved in economical arcs that wasted no energy. Every strike found vital organs. Every movement positioned him for the next kill. He was not fighting, he was culling. Elyra had seen him brutal before, had watched him break assassins and threaten nobles. But this was different. This was the Shadow King fully unleashed. No restraint, no mercy, just calculated violence designed to break enemy morale as much as enemy bodies. Within 5 minutes, 20 rebels lay dead. Within 10, the assault stalled as men realized they were not fighting a king, but something far more dangerous. A predator who had spent 15 years learning how to turn human bodies into broken meat. The rebels pulled back to regroup. Silence crashed down like a physical weight. Vaelor stood among the corpses, breathing hard, armor splattered with blood that was not his. He looked at Elyra across the throne hall, and something passed between them. Not words. Understanding. He had just shown her exactly what he was beneath the crown and the careful control. A monster who chose to protect instead of destroy. But still a monster. Commander Kael moved to his side, voice low. They will come again. Harder. They know now that frontal assault will not work. They will try fire or siege tactics. Let them. Vaelor's voice was flat. We hold until reinforcements arrive. However long that takes. The soldiers are exhausted. We have been fighting for 6 hours. Then they rest in shifts. We do not have the luxury of full rest. Kael hesitated. Your Majesty, if I may speak plainly. Always. We cannot win this. Even if we hold for 3 days, even if reinforcements arrive, the Empire is fractured. 30 houses backed Vex's rebellion. That is a third of the kingdom. This civil war will last years. I know. Then why not negotiate? Offer terms, find a middle path that preserves some stability. Vaelor looked at her with eyes that held no illusion. Because the moment I negotiate, I signal that rebellion is viable, that threatening the crown produces results. Every ambitious noble in the Empire will see opportunity. He turned back to survey the carnage. We do not negotiate with traitors. We destroy them so completely that the next generation thinks twice before trying. Even if it costs the kingdom? Especially if it costs the kingdom. His voice was cold. Better to rule ashes than be replaced by men who think violence is the path to power. The philosophy was brutal. It was also honest. Kings who compromised often ended up dead. Vaelor had learned that lesson watching his father get assassinated for trying to be merciful. Elyra moved through the wounded soldiers, doing what she could with limited medical supplies. Bandaging cuts, offering water, speaking quietly to men who were terrified and exhausted and still willing to die for a king most of them did not love. One young soldier, barely 20, looked up at her with blood on his teeth. Why are you here, my lady? You could have run, could have escaped before the siege started. Elyra pressed cloth against his shoulder wound, because running would prove them right. That I am a weakness, a liability, something that makes the king vulnerable. But you do make him vulnerable. The soldier's honesty was brutal. We all see it. He fights differently when you are near. More reckless, more desperate, maybe. But he also fights for something instead of just surviving. She met the soldier's eyes. A king who has nothing to protect except power becomes a tyrant. A king who fights for someone he loves becomes human. I would rather stand beside a human than serve a tyrant. Even if it gets you killed? Especially then. The soldier almost smiled. Then you are braver than most of us, my lady. No, just tired of being afraid. She moved to the next wounded man, and the next, until her hands were stained red and her back ached from crouching. This was the reality of kingship that nobles in their estates never saw. The cost paid in blood by men who had no stake in political philosophy, but bled anyway, because someone had to hold the line. The second wave came at dawn. This time, they brought fire. Burning arrows arced through the throne hall, igniting tapestries and wooden furniture. Smoke filled the air, thick and choking. Loyal soldiers fought blind, coughing, eyes streaming. The rebels pressed the advantage, pushing deeper into the throne hall than before. Vaelor was everywhere at once, killing rebels, dragging wounded soldiers to safety, barking orders through smoke that turned the battle into nightmare. His armor was blackened with soot, his face was a mask of ash and blood. But he did not stop, did not slow, moved like something that had forgotten how to feel pain. The curse was helping him. Elyra could see it in the way his movements became more fluid, more brutal. The darkness beneath his skin responding to violence like it was food. The monster inside him waking up because battle was its natural habitat. He was losing control. Not completely. Not yet. But the edge was there. Visible in his eyes when he ripped a rebel's throat open with his bare hands instead of using his sword. When he laughed at an enemy's death instead of just moving to the next target. The curse fed on violence. And this battle was a feast. Elyra pushed through the smoke toward him. She did not shout his name, did not try to reach him through the chaos, just moved until she was close enough to touch his arm. The contact registered immediately. Vaelor froze mid-strike, sword raised, rebel at his feet already dying. He turned to look at her and she saw the war happening behind his eyes. Monster versus man, curse versus control. She pressed her hand against his chest, directly over his heart. The darkness receded. Not much. Not enough to matter strategically, but enough that when he looked at her, she saw recognition instead of just hunger. "Stay with me," she said quietly. "Do not let the curse win. It is the only thing keeping me alive right now." "No, I am keeping you alive. The curse is just making you effective." "There is a difference?" "Yes. One lets you survive, the other lets you live." He stared at her for a heartbeat, then nodded once and turned back to the battle. But his movements were more controlled now, more precise, less wasteful. The second wave broke against their defense like the first, but barely. They were losing ground, losing soldiers, losing the war of attrition that sieges always became. By noon, they had lost the eastern third of the throne hall. By evening, half their soldiers were dead or too wounded to fight. By midnight of the second day, Commander Kael pulled Vaelor aside with an expression that said she was about to deliver news he did not want to hear. "We cannot hold another assault. The soldiers are dead on their feet. We are out of arrows, low on medical supplies. One more wave and we break." Vaelor looked at the remaining fighters. Maybe 60 soldiers still combat ready, against 200 rebels who were rotating fresh troops into the assault. The math was impossible. How long until reinforcements? Another day minimum. Maybe 2 if the runners were intercepted. "We do not have 2 days, I know." Silence stretched between them. "Then what do you recommend, Commander?" Kael took a breath. "Surrender. Negotiate terms. Save as many lives as possible." Vaelor shook his head. "Surrender means execution. Mine and Elyra's both. The rebels will not let us live. We are the symbol of everything they are fighting against. Then we make a stand. Fight until the end. Take as many of them with us as possible. That is suicide." "Yes, but it is honest suicide. Better than dying on our knees." Vaelor looked across the throne hall to where Elyra sat with wounded soldiers, speaking quietly, offering what comfort she could. She looked exhausted, covered in ash and blood, but still moving, still helping, still refusing to break. He had dragged her into this, had made her a target because he was selfish enough to keep her close. And now she was going to die in a throne hall under siege because he could not let go. The weight of that realization was heavier than 15 years of curse combined. Commander Kael spoke carefully. "Your Majesty, there is one more option." "What?" "Send her through the escape tunnels. Give her a chance to survive, even if we do not." Vaelor's jaw tightened. "She will not go." "Then make her. You are still king. Give the order. She will refuse. Then have guards carry her. Bind her if necessary, but get her out before the next assault. That is kidnapping. That is survival." Kael's voice was steady. "You asked what I recommend. I recommend saving the one person in this citadel whose death would haunt you more than losing the kingdom." The statement landed like a blade between ribs, because it was true. Vaelor would burn the empire to ash if it meant keeping Elyra alive. Everyone knew it. The rebels knew it. His own soldiers knew it. The only person who seemed not to understand the depth of his obsession was Elyra herself. He crossed the throne hall to where she sat. She looked up, reading his expression immediately. No. You do not know what I am about to say. Yes, I do. And the answer is no. Elyra. His voice was rough. We cannot hold one more assault and everyone in this hall dies, including you. Then we die together. That is not romantic. That is wasteful. Maybe. But it is my choice. Not anymore. He gestured to 2 nearby guards. Escort Lady Vale to the escape tunnels. Use whatever force necessary. The guards moved immediately. Elyra stood, backing away. Vaelor, do not do this. I have to. His eyes were hollow. I have made a lot of brutal choices in my life. Killed people who probably did not deserve it. Sacrificed innocence for strategic gain. Ruled through fear because fear kept people alive. But I will not stand here and watch you die for a kingdom that never wanted you in the first place. This is not about the kingdom. This is about you. I know. He moved closer. And I am selfish enough to save you even if you hate me for it. I will never hate you. You might. When you are safe in the Northern Territories and I am dead in this throne hall, you might look back and hate me for making the choice without asking. Then that is your burden to carry, not mine. The guards reached for her arms. Elyra pulled away, eyes blazing. If you send me away, if you die here without me, I will never forgive myself. Do you understand? I will spend the rest of my life knowing I abandoned you when you needed me most. You did not abandon me. I am sending you away. It is the same thing. No. Abandonment is choice. This is survival. She stared at him, tears cutting tracks through the ash on her face. You are wrong. Survival without you is not living. It is just existing. And I am tired of just existing. The words broke something in him. Vaelor gestured for the guards to stop. They stepped back immediately. He moved to Elyra and pulled her close, forehead against hers, hands shaking with the effort of not falling apart completely. I do not know how to let you die, he whispered. I have survived everything, assassination, battle, the curse, years of isolation and pain, but I do not know how to survive losing you. Then do not let me go. If you stay, you die. If I leave, you die. Her voice was steady. At least if we stay together, we die for something that matters. This is insane. Yes, you're going to get us both killed. Probably. And you are fine with that? No. But I am fine with dying beside someone I love instead of living alone in safety. She pulled back to look at him. That is what you taught me. That survival without purpose is just slow death. So if we are going to die, let us die fighting for each other instead of running from the inevitable. Vaelor stared at her for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. The decision was made. They would stand together. And if the Empire burned, at least it would burn with both of them still human instead of just surviving. He turned to Commander Kael. Prepare for final defense. Everyone who can still fight forms up at the throne. No fallback positions. No retreat. We hold here or we die here. Kael nodded grimly. It has been an honor, Your Majesty. The honor was mine, Commander. The remaining soldiers gathered in a ragged semicircle around the throne. 60 exhausted fighters, broken armor, dulled weapons, faces gray with fatigue and the knowledge that they were about to die. But they stood. Because sometimes courage was not about winning, it was about refusing to kneel when the entire world demanded it. Vaelor climbed the steps to his throne and turned to face his soldiers. He did not give a rousing speech, did not promise victory or glory, just spoke the truth. The rebels are coming. They outnumber us 3-1. They are fresh while we are exhausted. By every strategic measure, we cannot win. The soldiers stared at him, waiting. But we are not fighting to win. We are fighting because surrender means execution, because living on our knees is worse than dying on our feet, because sometimes the only way to preserve your humanity is to refuse the easy path. His voice rose until it filled the throne hall. I am not a good king. I have made brutal choices, killed innocents, ruled through fear. I am exactly the monster they say I am, but I am your monster. And I will die before I let ambitious nobles who hide behind philosophy while funding assassination replace me. He drew his sword, the steel catching torchlight. So here we stand, at the end of everything. And we choose to fight not because we think we will survive, but because fighting is the only choice that lets us look ourselves in the mirror. If there is an afterlife, I want to enter it knowing I protected the people who trusted me. He looked at Elyra standing beside the throne. Even if it cost me the kingdom. The soldiers raised their weapons in silent acknowledgement. They understood. This was not about tactics anymore. This was about refusing to let fear make their final choice. The third wave came with the dawn of the third day. This time, Lord Hadrian led them personally. He entered the throne hall flanked by 50 elite soldiers, armor pristine, sword drawn, confidence absolute. Behind him, Lord Vex walked free, wearing noble silks instead of prison chains. The two men had planned this rebellion together, used philosophy as cover for personal ambition. Vaelor descended from his throne to meet them. The two sides faced each other across 20 feet of blood-stained marble. Exhausted defenders, fresh attackers. The outcome was inevitable. Hadrian spoke first. Your Majesty, this does not have to end in more death. Surrender now. I will ensure you are treated with dignity. Your definition of dignity probably involves execution. Painless execution. Quick, merciful. More than you have given others. Vaelor's smile was cold. I am not interested in your mercy. Then you are a fool. Hadrian gestured at the remaining soldiers. You have lost. Your reinforcements are not coming. We intercepted the runners 3 days ago. No one knows you are under siege. No one is coming to save you. The words landed like hammer blows. No reinforcements, no rescue, no hope. Just 60 exhausted soldiers against 300 fresh rebels. Vaelor felt the curse surge beneath his skin, the darkness responding to despair like it was an invitation. His scars burned. His vision began to darken at the edges. The monster inside him clawing toward the surface because survival instinct recognized they were about to die. Then Elyra's hand found his. The touch was light, brief, but it anchored him. The curse receded fractionally, not enough to matter for combat, but enough that when Vaelor spoke, his voice was steady. You are right. I have lost the kingdom, lost the throne, lost everything I spent 15 years building. His eyes locked on Hadrian. But I have not lost the one thing that actually matters. So here is my counteroffer. Let my soldiers leave through the escape tunnels. Let Elyra go free. And I will surrender to you without resistance, Hadrian considered. And if we refuse? Then I stop fighting the curse. I let it consume me completely. I become the monster you have spent your entire rebellion warning nobles about. And before I lose consciousness, before the transformation completes, I will kill everyone in this throne hall, starting with you. The threat was delivered with absolute calm, because it was not a threat, it was a promise. Hadrian's confidence flickered. You would rather become a monster than surrender? I would rather be a monster that protects what I love than a king who rules ashes. Vaelor's voice was flat. Choose quickly. I can already feel the curse spreading. Every second you delay, I get closer to losing control. It was true. The scars across his skin were darkening, shadows pooling beneath his eyes, his breathing becoming ragged. The curse was no longer waiting for permission. It was taking control because violence had awakened it fully. Elyra felt terror claw up her spine. She had seen glimpses of the Shadow King before. But this was different. This was complete transformation beginning in real time. Vaelor looked at her one final time, and she saw the man beneath the monster, saw the apology, the grief, the terrible acknowledgement that he was about to sacrifice his humanity to buy her survival. I love you, he said quietly. Never forget that. Then the curse took him. His body convulsed, bones cracked and reformed. Shadows poured from his scars like living ink. His eyes went completely black. And the last thing Elyra saw before the transformation completed was Vaelor Draven smiling at her with genuine peace on his face. Because he had finally found something worth becoming a monster for. The throne hall erupted into chaos. The Shadow King emerged fully for the first time in recorded history while witnesses watched. And every soldier in that hall, rebel and loyalist alike, realized the same terrifying truth. They had pushed too far, demanded too much, and now the beast they had spent centuries fearing was loose with nothing left to contain it except the fragile hope that somewhere inside the monster a man still remembered what he was fighting for. The Shadow King was not a metaphor. It was flesh and fury and centuries of inherited violence given physical form. Vaelor's body twisted and expanded, bones cracking and reforming, muscles tearing and rebuilding into something that had never been meant to walk among humans. His armor shattered outward in fragments of black steel, his skin darkened to the color of volcanic glass. Claws erupted from fingertips that had once held Elyra gently. His face elongated into something between wolf and nightmare, teeth like daggers, eyes pools of absolute darkness that reflected no light. The curse had finally won. Or so it seemed. The throne hall went silent except for the wet sound of transformation completing. Rebels and loyalists alike froze, weapons forgotten, survival instinct overriding combat training. Because what stood before them was not a king anymore. It was the thing their ancestors had whispered about in cautionary tales. The beast that ate kingdoms. The monster that turned battlefields into graveyards. The Shadow King stood at full height, easily 9 feet tall, radiating darkness like heat from a forge. It turned its head slowly, taking in the soldiers surrounding it with predatory calculation. Then it screamed. The sound was not human, not animal, something older and more fundamental. The scream of rage that had been building for 15 generations, compressed into one cursed bloodline, finally released without restraint. Windows shattered. Soldiers dropped to their knees, hands over ears, blood trickling from noses. The scream went on until it felt like the citadel itself might crack under the pressure. When silence finally returned, the Shadow King moved. It did not attack randomly, did not rampage mindlessly. The curse was not madness. It was concentrated violence with perfect tactical awareness. The beast moved through rebel lines like death itself, each strike calculated for maximum devastation. Soldiers died before they could raise weapons. Armor crumpled like parchment. Bones shattered. Blood painted the black marble floors in spreading pools that reflected torchlight like dark mirrors. Lord Hadrian tried to retreat, shouting orders that no one followed because retreat meant turning your back on a predator that could cross 20 feet in 2 strides. The Shadow King caught him by the throat and lifted him off the ground. Hadrian's elite soldiers tried to intervene. The beast swatted them aside without effort. Bones broke. Men flew backward into walls hard enough to leave cracks in stone. The efficiency was terrifying. This was not rage. This was surgical elimination of threats by something that understood warfare better than the generals who studied it. Because Vaelor Draven had spent 15 years learning to fight while in constant pain, and now the pain was gone, replaced by perfect clarity and inhuman strength, and the absolute certainty that nothing in this throne hall could stop him. Hadrian clawed at the claws around his throat, gasping, "You are proving us right. You are the monster we said you were." The Shadow King's voice was Vaelor's voice, filtered through gravel and darkness. "I never denied being a monster. I just chose what to protect instead of what to destroy." It squeezed. Hadrian's neck broke with a sound like dry wood snapping. The beast dropped the body and turned toward Lord Vex, who stood frozen in the center of the throne hall, all his careful philosophy dissolving in the face of brutal reality. Vex had argued that the curse was too dangerous to tolerate, that concentrated power in a bloodline that transformed kings into monsters was fundamentally unstable. He had built an entire rebellion on that argument, convinced other nobles to risk everything based on the principle that distributed governance was safer. Now he was watching his thesis proven correct in the worst possible way. The Shadow King stalked toward him with the patience of something that knew its prey had nowhere to run. Vex backed away, stumbling over corpses, until he hit the wall. There was nowhere left to go. The beast leaned down, bringing its face level with Vex's, dark eyes reflecting the terrified noble's expression. "You wanted proof the curse was dangerous," the Shadow King rumbled. "Here it is. You were right. The bloodline should have ended generations ago. Kings should not carry this burden. Power should be distributed. Everything you said was correct." Vex's voice was barely a whisper. "Then why are you killing me?" "Because being right does not make you innocent. You funded assassination, orchestrated rebellion, caused the deaths of hundreds of soldiers who were just following orders. You wrapped murder in philosophy and convinced yourself that made it noble." The claws flexed, scraping stone. "There is no nobility in what you did, only cowardice dressed as reform." Vex closed his eyes, waiting for death. It did not come. The Shadow King straightened slowly, turning away. When it spoke again, the voice carried something that sounded almost human. "But killing you proves nothing except that I am exactly what you claimed. So I am going to do something worse. I'm going to let you live. Let you watch what happens when a monster chooses mercy over vengeance." The beast turned to survey the throne hall. Most of the rebels were dead. The survivors had dropped their weapons and were backing toward the exits, torn between the instinct to run and the terror that running would trigger pursuit. The Shadow King raised its voice until every person in the citadel could hear. "The rebellion is over. Anyone who wants to leave, leave now. I will not pursue. I will not execute. I will let you walk away and carry the story of what happens when you push a cursed king too far." No one moved. They were too shocked, too terrified. "Go." The command was absolute. "Before I change my mind." Rebels scrambled for the doors. Within moments, only the loyal soldiers remained, standing in stunned silence around their transformed king. Commander Kael stepped forward carefully, voice steady despite the carnage surrounding them. "Your Majesty, are you still in there?" The Shadow King turned to look at her. Its expression was difficult to read on an inhuman face, but something in the angle of its head suggested recognition. "I am here, Commander. The curse has me, but I have not lost myself completely. Can you transform back?" "I do not know. This has never happened before." Previous kings who transformed fully either died in the transformation or lost their minds entirely. His massive head tilted. "I can feel the curse trying to consume my thoughts, trying to turn me into pure instinct, but something is holding it back." "The Omega Bond," Kael said quietly. The Shadow King's dark eyes found Elyra, who had remained near the throne through the entire battle, too shocked to move, too terrified to look away. "Yes," the beast confirmed. "She is the anchor. Without her, I would already be lost." Elyra forced herself to move. Each step toward the Shadow King felt like walking into a storm. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to get away from the predator that had just killed 30 men without effort. But she kept walking until she stood directly in front of the beast, close enough to touch. The Shadow King looked down at her with those bottomless dark eyes. "You should be afraid of me," it rumbled. "I am afraid." Her voice shook. "I am absolutely terrified, but fear does not change what I know about you. And what do you know? That underneath this curse, underneath the violence and the darkness and the monster everyone sees, you are still the man who held me at night, who admitted vulnerability, who chose to protect instead of destroy, even when destruction was easier." She reached up slowly, telegraphing the movement, and placed her hand against the beast's chest where a human heart would be. The contact registered like lightning through stone. The Shadow King went rigid. Its breathing changed, becoming deeper, more controlled. The darkness surrounding it began to shimmer and pull inward, not disappearing, condensing, concentrating. The transformation reversed slowly. Bones cracked and reformed back into human proportions. Claws retracted. Skin lightened from volcanic glass to scarred flesh. The process looked excruciating. Vaelor's human voice emerged in screams that echoed off throne hall walls, but Elyra did not remove her hand, did not step back, just kept contact while the man she loved fought his way back from the edge of complete transformation. When it finally ended, Vaelor Draven collapsed to his knees, naked except for the tattered remains of his undergarments, covered in blood and ash, and the sweat of someone who had just survived the impossible. He looked up at Elyra with human eyes that held inhuman exhaustion. "I nearly lost myself," he whispered. "I was so close to just letting the curse win, to giving up and becoming the monster permanently because fighting felt too hard. But you did not give up. No, because you refused to let me." His hand covered hers, still pressed against his chest. "You stood in front of a beast that could have killed you without effort, and you chose to believe I was still human. That is either the bravest or the stupidest thing I have ever witnessed." "Probably both." Her voice broke. "But I could not let you go, not after everything we survived to reach each other." Vaelor pulled her down into his arms and held her while tremors ran through his body and silent sobs shook his shoulders. He had spent 15 years being strong, being brutal, being the weapon that kept the Empire intact, and he had finally reached the moment where strength was not enough, where all the violence and tactical brilliance and strategic cruelty could not save him. Only love had kept him human, and that realization was somehow more terrifying than any battle he had ever fought. Commander Kael approached carefully, offering a cloak that Vaelor wrapped around himself with shaking hands. The throne hall was a slaughterhouse, bodies everywhere. blood pooling in marble crevices, the cost of rebellion written in flesh and bone. What are your orders, Your Majesty? Vaelor looked at the carnage surrounding them. He had won. The rebellion was broken. The nobles who backed Vex were scattered or dead, but the victory felt hollow, pyrrhic. He had preserved the throne by becoming exactly the monster they claimed he was. Give the dead proper burials, all of them, rebels and loyalists alike. His voice was hoarse. They were soldiers following orders. They deserved dignity. And the captured rebels? Prison, not execution. Long sentences, but alive. He stood slowly, leaning on Elyra for support. I have spilled enough blood for one lifetime. I will not build the next era of this kingdom on more corpses. Kael nodded and moved to organize the soldiers. Elyra helped Vaelor walk to his throne. He did not sit on it, just stood beside it, staring at the seat of power that had cost him everything. I cannot do this anymore, he said quietly. I cannot keep being the brutal king who rules through fear and strategic violence. The curse nearly consumed me. If it happens again, I might not come back. Then do not be that king anymore. Elyra's voice was steady. Be something different, something new. The Empire will not accept different. They chose concentrated monarchy because it is predictable. If I change too much, I destabilize everything again. Maybe the Empire needs destabilization. Maybe tradition is just another word for refusing to evolve. That sounds like something Vex would say. Maybe he was not entirely wrong. Maybe his methods were terrible, but his instincts were correct. That power should not be concentrated in one person, especially one carrying a curse. Her hand found his. But maybe the solution is not distributed governance. Maybe it is shared governance. A king who rules alongside advisors who have real authority, who can challenge decisions, who can share the burden. You're describing limits on my power. Yes, that makes me weaker. No, it makes you human. She turned to face him fully. You survived by being a weapon, but weapons break. Humans adapt. If you want to truly heal the kingdom, you need to stop thinking like a weapon and start thinking like a person who understands that strength includes knowing when to share power. Vaelor studied her face for a long moment. That is going to take years to implement, decades maybe. The noble houses will resist. Traditionalists will fight every reform. Then we fight for decades. Together. She smiled slightly. You spent 15 years fighting alone. Maybe it is time to learn what partnership actually means. The words landed with the weight of truth that could not be argued against. Vaelor looked out over the throne hall, at the soldiers cleaning blood from marble floors, at the bodies being carried out for burial, at the empire he had barely saved by becoming the monster it feared. He thought about his father, assassinated for being too merciful, about previous kings who transformed and never came back, about the curse that had defined his bloodline for generations, and he made a choice that terrified him more than any battle. Summon the noble houses, he said to Commander Kael, all of them, every house leader who survived the rebellion. I am calling an imperial council. For what purpose? Reform. Real reform. Not the fantasy of distributed governance, but actual changes to how power functions in this kingdom. His voice strengthened. I am going to do what no king before me has done. I am going to voluntarily limit my own authority in exchange for stability and shared responsibility. That will be seen as weakness by some. Good. Let them think I am weak. Let them test me, and when they discover that weakness and wisdom are not the same thing, maybe we can build something that lasts longer than fear. 3 weeks later, the great hall of Nightbane Citadel was filled to capacity with noble representatives from across the empire. The walls had been scrubbed clean of blood. The windows had been replaced. The siege damage repaired. But everyone present remembered what had happened, remembered the Shadow King tearing through rebel forces, remembered how close the empire had come to complete collapse. Vaelor stood before them wearing formal regalia, but no crown. He had set the crown aside deliberately. This was not a speech from a king to subjects. This was a proposal from a leader to partners. He had spent 3 weeks drafting reforms with Elyra, Commander Kael, and the few advisors who had proven trustworthy. The document was radical, terrifying, and absolutely necessary if the empire was going to survive its own traditions. When Vaelor spoke, his voice carried to every corner of the hall. I inherited a kingdom built on conquest, fear, and blood. I ruled the only way I knew how, through brutality, through making myself so terrifying that rebellion seemed impossible. For 15 years, that strategy worked. He paused, letting the statement settle. But during the recent rebellion, I learned something that should have been obvious. Fear is not stability. It is pressure building toward eventual explosion. You can rule through fear for years, even decades. But eventually, people become desperate enough to risk everything because death starts looking better than constant terror. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. So I am proposing changes. Not because I am weak, not because the rebellion succeeded, but because I refuse to spend the rest of my life becoming more monstrous just to maintain control. His eyes scanned the assembled nobles. I am establishing an imperial council with real legislative authority. 20 seats, half appointed by me, half elected by noble houses. No law or major policy can be enacted without council approval. The hall erupted. Nobles shouted questions, objections, concerns. Vaelor let them talk for several minutes before raising his hand for silence. I know this seems radical. I know it limits my authority significantly. But here is what you need to understand. I nearly died during that siege. Not from rebel weapons. From the curse. I transformed fully. Became the monster you have all feared for generations. He gestured toward Elyra, standing beside the throne. The only reason I came back, the only reason I am standing here instead of being a mindless beast locked in a dungeon, is because she anchored me. One person, one connection. That is how fragile this empire's stability is. My survival depends on a bond that could be severed by assassination or accident or simple bad luck. He let that sink in. So I am choosing to distribute power not because I want to, but because concentrating everything in one cursed bloodline is fundamentally unsustainable. If I die, if the curse takes me permanently, the empire needs functioning governance already in place. Not chaos, not civil war. Actual leadership that can continue without me. A voice from the crowd, older noble with traditional bearing. And what happens if this council challenges your authority directly? If they vote against something you believe is necessary? Then we negotiate, compromise, find middle ground. Vaelor's voice was firm. The same way humans have solved conflicts since the beginning of civilization, through dialogue instead of domination. That is not how empires function. Maybe it should be. Maybe the reason empires collapse is because they prioritize domination over adaptation. His eyes hardened. I am offering you partnership, a chance to shape the kingdom's future instead of just obeying commands. But make no mistake, this is not weakness. This is evolution. And anyone who interprets shared governance as an invitation to test my resolve will discover that I can still be the brutal king when necessary. The distinction was important. Vaelor was not surrendering authority. He was choosing to share it. But the capacity for violence remained if violence became necessary. The vote took 3 days. Nobles debated. Factions formed and dissolved. Traditional houses argued for maintaining concentrated monarchy. Progressive houses pushed for even more radical reform. The middle ground Vaelor proposed was too conservative for some, too radical for others. But eventually, pragmatism won over ideology. The Imperial Council was established by a vote of 68 houses in favor, 43 against. It was not overwhelming support, but it was enough. The Empire had chosen evolution over tradition, and King Vaelor Draven had voluntarily limited his own power in exchange for long-term stability. The cost of that choice would not be known for years, maybe decades, but the alternative was continuing down a path that led inevitably to more rebellions, more bloodshed, more young kings dying before they could learn how to rule with wisdom instead of fear. 6 months after the siege, Elyra walked through gardens that had been planted in the courtyard where the execution platform once stood. Flowers bloomed in volcanic soil, trees grew in spaces that had seen nothing but stone for generations. The citadel was changing, slowly, carefully, but undeniably. She found Vaelor on the battlements overlooking the northern mountains. He stood with Commander Kael, discussing border security rotations, but dismissed the commander when Elyra approached. Kael nodded respectfully and left. Vaelor turned to Elyra with an expression that had become more common in recent months. Peace, not complete, not without shadows, but genuine moments of calm that had been impossible during his years of ruling through pain. The council met today, he said. passed legislation reforming Omega rights, full legal equality, property ownership, educational access, everything we proposed. That is progress. It is overdue. His voice carried old guilt. I should have done it years ago. Should have recognized that excluding half the population from participation was strategic stupidity. You were surviving, not building. Elyra leaned against the battlements beside him. You cannot blame yourself for not having energy for reform when you are fighting the curse every day. Maybe, but I can take responsibility for changing it now. They stood in comfortable silence, watching clouds move across mountain peaks. The empire was not fixed, would probably never be completely healed, but it was better than it had been, more flexible, more willing to adapt. Vaelor spoke quietly. I still have nightmares about the transformation, about losing control completely, killing you while the curse controlled me. But you did not lose control. You came back. Barely. If you had not been there, if you had run when I told you to, I would still be the Shadow King, locked in some dungeon, waiting to die. He turned to look at her. You saved my life by refusing to abandon me. I do not know how to repay that. You do not need to repay it. That is what love means. Staying even when leaving makes more sense. I do not deserve you. Probably not. But you have me anyway. She smiled slightly. Besides, you are improving. The council has only overridden your decisions twice this month. That is progress from last month's 5 times. He almost laughed. I am learning humility. It is a painful education. Most valuable educations are. They fell into silence again. This time Vaelor reached for her hand, fingers interlacing naturally. The simple contact still quieted the curse, still made the pain recede. But it had become more than just symptom management. It had become connection, partnership, the foundation of something neither of them had believed possible when Elyra first fell before his throne. Do you regret it? He asked suddenly. Staying, choosing this life instead of safety. Elyra considered the question honestly. She thought about the siege, the violence, the terror of watching him transform, the months of political maneuvering afterward, the constant pressure of being the Omega who influenced the throne. No, she said finally. I do not regret choosing love over safety. Safety is comfortable. Love is worth fighting for. Even when fighting means nearly dying? Especially then. Because surviving together matters more than surviving alone. She squeezed his hand. You taught me that. By refusing to give up, even when giving up would have been easier. By choosing to come back from the transformation instead of letting the curse win. I chose to come back because you refused to let me go. Then we saved each other. That is what partnership means. The sun was setting over Noctaryn, painting the volcanic mountains in shades of copper and gold. The kingdom stretched out below them, imperfect and struggling and slowly learning how to function without fear as its primary motivator. Vaelor pulled Elyra close, and they stood together watching their empire adapt to a new reality. One where kings could admit weakness, where Omegas could stand beside thrones, where love was not a liability, but a strength that made survival feel like something worth the cost. The curse was still there, would always be there. Generations of inherited violence did not disappear just because one king chose differently, but it was manageable now, controlled, no longer the defining feature of his existence, and that was enough. Not perfect, not complete healing, but enough to build a life worth living instead of just surviving. Commander Kael found them an hour later with news that the first session of the Imperial Council had concluded successfully. Legislation passed. Compromises reached. The Empire functioning with shared governance for the first time in its history. Vaelor listened to the report and nodded. Then he did something no king before him had done. He thanked his commander, not as king to subordinate, as one person to another. Kael looked surprised, then smiled slightly and left. Elyra raised an eyebrow. You're getting soft in your old age. I prefer the term evolved. Vaelor's smile was genuine. Softness implies weakness. Evolution implies adaptation. I am still brutal when necessary. I just choose necessity more carefully now. That is called wisdom. That is called having someone who reminds me I am human before I forget completely. They returned to the throne hall together as night fell across Noctaryn. The hall was empty now, cleaned and restored, waiting for tomorrow's council session. The throne sat at the far end, black iron and volcanic glass, symbol of concentrated power that Vaelor had chosen to share. He walked to it slowly and sat down. Not as a king claiming dominance, as a man acknowledging responsibility. Elyra stood beside him, hand on his shoulder, presence anchoring him to humanity the way she had during the transformation. "This is going to be difficult," Vaelor said quietly. "Reforming an empire while managing a curse, while learning how to rule through partnership instead of fear. Some days I will fail, some days I will make decisions that hurt people. Some days the old brutal king will resurface because brutality is the tool I know best. I know. And I will be here to remind you when you are slipping, to challenge you when you need challenging, to support you when the weight becomes too heavy. That is what you signed up for? No. But it is what I am choosing, every day." She leaned down and kissed the top of his head. "Because choosing you means choosing all of you. The king and the monster, the brutality and the tenderness, the darkness and the light. That is a terrible deal for you. Maybe. But it is mine. And I refuse to let anyone else have it." Vaelor stood and pulled her into his arms properly. They held each other in the empty throne hall, while the citadel settled into night around them. Two people who had survived hell by refusing to let go of each other. Two people learning how to build something lasting from the wreckage of everything that had tried to destroy them. The empire would continue struggling. The reforms would face resistance. The curse would never fully disappear. But for the first time in 15 years, King Vaelor Draven looked at the future and saw possibility instead of just survival. And that was worth every brutal choice, every painful transformation, every moment of darkness that had led them here. Because kingdoms rise and fall. Empires collapse and rebuild. But the choice to love in the face of overwhelming darkness, to choose connection over isolation, to believe that humanity matters more than power, that choice echoes through generations. Not as conquest, not as legend, but as the quiet revolution of one person refusing to let another face the darkness alone. And sometimes, that is the bravest choice of all. Vaelor and Elyra walked through the citadel together toward their private quarters. The guards nodded respectfully. The servants moved with less fear than they had months ago. The atmosphere of Nightbane's citadel was changing, not dramatically, not overnight, but measurably. In their chambers, away from the weight of crowns and councils, they were just two people who had found each other in the worst possible circumstances and chosen to stay despite every reason to run. Vaelor stood at the window looking out at the empire he had nearly lost. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for not giving up on me when I had given up on myself." Elyra moved to stand beside him. "You would have done the same for me." "Yes," without hesitation. "Then we are even." He turned to her, scarred hands framing her face with impossible gentleness. "No. I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of what you gave me. Not just survival, but hope, purpose, a reason to be human instead of just a weapon wearing a crown. You were always worthy. You just needed someone to remind you." They kissed, slowly, deeply, with the knowledge that they had survived the worst and emerged changed, but not broken. When they finally pulled apart, Vaelor rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he whispered. "In case I have not said it enough. You have said it, but I never get tired of hearing it. Good. Because I plan to keep saying it, every day, for however long we have. That could be decades. I certainly hope so." He smiled. "I have a lot of making up to do for the years I wasted being terrified of connection. Then we should probably get started." They moved to the bed together, not as king and subject, not as alpha and omega, but as partners who had chosen each other despite the empire demanding they choose power instead. And in that choice, in that refusal to let tradition dictate their humanity, they found something rarer than conquest. They found peace. Not perfect peace. Not peace without scars or struggles or the occasional resurgence of old wounds, but the kind of peace that comes from knowing you are seen completely by another person and loved anyway. The kind of peace that makes survival feel like living. The kind of peace that reminds you why kingdoms are worth protecting in the first place. Outside, the empire of Noctaryn continued its slow transformation. Inside Nightbane's citadel, a cursed king held the woman he loved and allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, the darkness did not get the final word. That sometimes, After all the violence and pain and impossible choices, hope won. Not because hope was stronger than darkness, but because two people refused to let darkness be the only story. And that refusal changed everything. The Shadow King was not destroyed. The curse was not cured. The empire was not perfected. But a man learned how to be human again, despite carrying a monster inside him. And a woman learned that strength was not the absence of fear, but the choice to love anyway. Together, they rebuilt a kingdom, not on blood and terror, but on the radical belief that vulnerability was not weakness, that shared power was not surrender, that love, fierce and uncompromising and willing to stand in front of beasts, was the most revolutionary force in any empire. And years later, when historians wrote about the reign of King Vaelor Draven, they would debate the reforms, analyze the political shifts, catalog the legislative changes that transformed Noctaryn from brutal monarchy to shared governance. But the people who lived through it remembered something simpler. They remembered the day their king admitted he was human, and the Omega who loved him enough to believe it, and the empire that learned, slowly and painfully and incompletely, that the greatest strength was not refusing to fall, but choosing to rise together. That was the legacy. Not conquest, not domination, not the fear that kept enemies at bay, but the choice, made every day by two people who survived hell, to keep choosing each other, to keep building something better from the ruins of everything that tried to destroy them, to prove that love, real and honest and willing to fight for impossible things, could change the world one brutal choice at a time. And in the end, that was the only story that mattered. The rest was just noise.